With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the conclusion of our negotiations.
Order. Mr. Shannon, sort out your seating arrangements. Well done. And there's a long afternoon lies ahead. Let's have a bit of quiet and respectful order for the Prime Minister.
And with permission, I would like to make a statement on the conclusion of our negotiations to leave the European Union. At yesterday's Special European Council in Brussels, I reached a deal with the leaders of the other 27 EU member states on a withdrawal agreement that will ensure our smooth and orderly departure on the 29th of March next year, and tied to this agreement a political declaration on an ambitious future partnership that is in our national interest. Mr. Speaker, this is the right deal for Britain because it delivers on the democratic decision of the British people. It takes back control of our borders, it ends the free movement of people in full once and for all, allowing the government to introduce a new skills-based immigration system. It takes back control of our laws, it ends the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the UK, and means instead our laws being made in our parliaments enforced by our courts. And it takes back control of our money. It ends the vast annual payments we send to Brussels. So instead we can spend taxpayers' money on our own priorities, including the £394 million a week of extra investment into our long-term plan for the National Health Service. By creating a new free trade area with no tariffs, fees, charges, quantitative restrictions or rules of origin checks, this deal protects jobs, including those that rely on integrated supply chains. It protects our security with a close relationship on defence and on tackling crime and terrorism, which will help to keep all our people safe. And it protects the integrity of our United Kingdom, meeting our commitments in Northern Ireland and delivering for the whole UK family, including our overseas territories and the Crown dependencies. Mr. Speaker, on Gibraltar, we have worked constructively with the governments of Spain and Gibraltar, and I want to pay tribute in particular to Gibraltar's Chief Minister, Fabian Picardo, for his statesmanship in these negotiations. We have ensured that Gibraltar is covered by the whole withdrawal agreement and by the implementation period. And for the future partnership, the UK government will be negotiating for the whole UK family, including Gibraltar. As Fabian Picardo said this weekend, and I quote, "Every aspect of the response of the United Kingdom was agreed with the government of Gibraltar. We have worked seamlessly together in this, as we have in all other aspects of this two-year period of negotiation. Most importantly, the legal text of the draft withdrawal agreement has not been changed. That is what the Spanish government repeatedly sought, but they have not achieved that. The United Kingdom has not let us down." Mr. Speaker, our message to the people of Gibraltar is clear. We will always stand by you. We are proud that Gibraltar is British, and our position on sovereignty has not and will not change. Mr. Speaker, the withdrawal agreement will ensure that we leave the European Union on the 29th of March next year in a smooth and orderly way. It protects the rights of EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU, so they can carry on living their lives as before. It delivers a time-limited implementation period to give business time to prepare for the new arrangements. During the implementation period, trade will continue on current terms, so businesses only have to face one set of changes. It ensures a fair settlement of our financial obligations, less than half of what some originally expected and demanded. And it meets our commitment to ensure there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and also no customs border in the Irish Sea, in the event that the future relationship is not ready by the end of the implementation period. Mr. Speaker, I know some members remain concerned that we could find ourselves stuck in this backstop, so let me address this directly. First, this is an insurance policy that no one wants to use. Both the UK and the EU are fully committed. Both the UK and the EU are fully committed to having our future relationship in place by the 1st of January 2021. And the withdrawal agreement has a legal duty on both sides to use best endeavours to avoid the backstop ever coming into force. If, despite this, the future relationship is not ready by the end of 2020, we would not be forced to use the backstop. We would have a clear choice between the backstop or a short extension to the implementation period. If we did choose the backstop, the legal text is clear that it should be temporary and that the Article 50 legal base cannot provide for a permanent relationship. And there is now more flexibility that it can be superseded either by the future relationship or by alternative arrangements, which include the potential for facilitative arrangements and technologies to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland. There is also a termination clause which allows the backstop to be turned off when we have fulfilled our commitments on the Northern Ireland border. And there is a unilateral right to trigger a review through the Joint Committee and the ability to seek independent arbitration if the EU does not use good faith in this process. Furthermore, as a result of the changes we have negotiated, the legal text is now also clear that once the backstop has been superseded, it shall cease to apply. So if a future Parliament decided to then move from an initially deep trade relationship to a looser one, the backstop could not return. Mr. Speaker, I do not pretend that either we or the EU are entirely happy with these arrangements, and that's how it must be. Were either party entirely happy, that party would have no incentive to move on to the future relationship. But there is no alternative deal that honours our commitments to Northern Ireland which does not involve this insurance policy, and the EU would not have agreed any future partnership without it. Put simply, there is no deal that comes without a backstop, and without a backstop there is no deal. Mr. Speaker, the withdrawal agreement is accompanied by a political declaration which sets out the scope and terms of an ambitious future relationship between the UK and the EU. It is a detailed set of instructions to negotiators that will be used to deliver a legal agreement on our future relationship after we have left. The linkage clause between the withdrawal agreement and this declaration requires both sides to use best endeavours to get this legal text agreed and implemented by the end of 2020. And both sides are committed to making preparations for an immediate start to the formal negotiations after our withdrawal. The declaration contains specific detail on our future economic relationship. This includes a new free trade area with no tariffs, fees, quantitative restrictions or rules of origin checks, an unprecedented economic relationship that no other major economy has. It includes liberalisation in trade in services well beyond WTO commitments and building on recent EU free trade agreements. It includes new arrangements for our financial services sector, ensuring market access cannot be withdrawn on a whim and providing stability and certainty for our world-leading industry. And it ensures that we will leave EU programmes that do not work in our interests. So we will be out of the common agricultural policy that has failed our farmers and out of the common fisheries policy that has failed our coastal communities. Instead, as the political declaration sets out, we will be an independent coastal state once again. We will take back full sovereign control over our waters, so we will be able to decide for ourselves who we allow to fish in our waters. The EU have maintained throughout this process that they wanted to link overall access to markets to access to fisheries. They failed in the withdrawal agreement and they failed again in the political declaration. It is no surprise some are already trying to lay down markers again for the future relationship. But they should be getting used to the answer by now. It is not going to happen. Finally, the declaration is clear that whatever is agreed in the future partnership must recognise the development of an independent UK trade policy beyond this economic partnership. So for the first time in 40 years, the UK will be able to strike new trade deals and open up new markets for our goods and services in the fastest growing economies around the world. Mr. Speaker, as I set out for the House last week, the future relationship also includes a comprehensive new security partnership with close reciprocal law enforcement and judicial cooperation to keep all our people safe. At the outset, we were told that being outside of free movement and outside of the Schengen area, we would be treated like any other non-EU state on security. But this deal delivers the broadest security partnership in the EU's history, including arrangements for effective data exchange on passenger name records, DNA, fingerprints and vehicle registration data, as well as extradition arrangements like those in the European arrest warrant. And it opens the way to sharing the types of information included in the ECRIS and SIS2 databases on wanted or missing persons and criminal records. Mr. Speaker, this has been a long and complex negotiation. It has required give and take on both sides, and that is the nature of a negotiation. But this deal honours the result of the referendum, while providing a close economic and security relationship with our nearest neighbours, and in so doing offers a brighter future for the British people outside of the EU. And I can say to the House with absolute certainty that there is not a better deal available. And my fellow leaders were very clear on that themselves yesterday. Our duty as a Parliament over these coming weeks is to examine this deal in detail, to debate it respectfully, to listen to our constituents and decide what is in our national interest. There is a choice which this House will have to make. We can back this deal, deliver on the vote of the referendum, and move on to building a brighter future of opportunity and prosperity for all our people. Or this House can choose to reject this deal and go back to square one. Because no one knows what would happen if this deal doesn't pass. It would open the door to more division and more uncertainty, with all the risks that will entail. Mr. Speaker, I believe our national interest is clear. The British people want us to get on with a deal that honours the referendum and allows us to come together again as a country whichever way we voted. This is that deal, a deal that delivers for the British people, and I commend this statement to the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for the advanced copy of her statement. The Prime Minister may want to try and sell yesterday's summit as a great success, but to borrow a phrase, the reality is nothing has changed. The Prime Minister says if we reject this deal, it will take us back to square one. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, under this government, we've never got beyond square one. The botched deal is a bad deal for this country. And all yesterday did was mark the end of this government's failed and miserable negotiations. There can be no doubt that this deal would leave us with the worst of all worlds. No say over future rules and no certainty for the future. Even the Prime Minister's own cabinet can't bring themselves to sell this deal. The Foreign Secretary said yesterday, and I quote, "This deal mitigates most of the negative impact." That's hardly a glowing endorsement. The silence from much of the rest of the Cabinet is telling. They know these negotiations have failed, and they know it will leave Britain worse off. In fact, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research confirmed this today, saying the Prime Minister's deal would mean our economy would be 3.9% smaller than it would otherwise be. This is more than our net contribution to the European Union, which is currently £8.9 billion a year, around £170 million per week. So why is the Prime Minister claiming that extra money to the NHS will be due to the Brexit dividend? Of course, Mr. Speaker, we look forward to the official Treasury forecasts and indeed the legal advice that this House voted to see nearly 2 weeks ago.
Where is it?
The Prime Minister's claim this deal takes back control over our borders, money and laws is frankly a fallacy. The reality is the opposite. The Prime Minister says the political declaration should give us comfort that the Northern Ireland backstop won't be needed. But in June 2020, this country will be faced with a stark choice. We can agree to extend the transition period or accept the backstop. So can the Prime Minister confirm that under her deal, if we are to avoid the backstop, we will have to accept whatever the European Union demands to extend the transition period, leaving a choice of paying more money without a say on the rules or enter a backstop leading to a regulatory border down the Irish Sea. So much for taking back control of our borders, money and laws. Mr. Speaker, it may not end there. The President of France, President Macron, has already made clear what his priorities will be in negotiating Britain a future deal. On Sunday he said, we will concentrate our efforts in order to obtain access to the British waters before the end of the transition period. And of course, all our fishermen will be protected. Isn't it the case that under the Prime Minister's botched deal, we will have to agree to those demands on access to waters and quota shares if we want to finalise a future trade deal or extend the transition? Breaking every promise the Prime Minister, the Environment Secretary and the Scotland Secretary have made to our fishing industry and our coastal communities. And there was another climb down over Gibraltar at the weekend. Isn't it the case that Spain now has a role over Gibraltar benefiting from any future relationship? That is still to be negotiated, not something the Prime Minister presented to the Commons last week. Mr. Speaker, in 2 weeks' time this House will begin voting on a legally binding withdrawal agreement and the vague wish list contained in the political declaration. The Prime Minister would be negotiating that future agreement from a position of profound weakness, threatened with paying more to extend the transition, with no say over our money, laws or borders, and at risk of the utterly unacceptable backstop, which was only made necessary by her own red lines, most of which have since been abandoned by her. Is it not in the national interest for the Prime Minister to plough on when it's clear this deal does not have the support of either side of this House or the country as a whole? Mr. Speaker, ploughing on is not stoic, it's an act of national self-harm. Instead of threatening this House with a no-deal scenario or a no-Brexit scenario, the Prime Minister now needs to prepare a Plan B, something her predecessors failed to do. There is a sensible deal. There is a sensible deal that could win the support of this House, based on a comprehensive customs union, a strong single market deal that protects rights.
Order. When the Prime Minister was addressing the House, I made it clear that she should be heard, and by and large she was. Those chuntering or yelling from a sedentary position, stop it. It's rude, foolish and doomed to fail. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a sensible deal that could win the support of this House, based on a comprehensive customs union, a strong single market deal that protects rights at work and environmental and consumer safeguards. The Prime Minister may have achieved agreement across 27 heads of state, but she's lost support of the country. Many young people and others see opportunities being taken away from them. Many people who voted Remain voted for an outward-looking and inclusive society, and they fear this deal and they fear the rhetoric of the Prime Minister in promoting this deal. Likewise, many people from areas that voted Leave feel this deal has betrayed the Brexit they voted for. It does not take back control, it will not make them better off, and it will not solve the economic deprivation that affects far too many communities and towns and cities across this country. This deal is not a plan for Britain's future. So, for the good of the nation, the House has very little choice but to reject this deal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to pick up on a number of the points that the right honourable gentleman made, he commented on the Brexit dividend and asked where the Brexit dividend was. We've been very clear that we will be able to use that money that we're not spending to the European Union to spend on our priorities, including the National Health Service. There was a time when the right honourable gentleman himself talked about spending the Brexit dividend on our public services. He talks about the backstop and the implementation period being the alternative. Actually, no, we have written in the possibility of alternative arrangements. The key thing is to deliver on our commitment of no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, a commitment which he appeared to dismiss in his response to my statement. We do not dismiss the people of Northern Ireland. We believe it's important to maintain that commitment. He talked about control of borders and said that our deal does not bring control of borders. Well, of course it does, because it brings an end to free movement once and for all. I note that the Labour Party has never been able to actually stand up and say that it wants to bring an end to free movement once and for all, and that's because they're not responding to the real needs and the real concerns of the British people on these issues. The British people want control of our borders. They want an end to free movement. This deal delivers it. He talked about, I was very interested that it now appears to be Labour Party policy to be in both the single market and the customs union. I hear yeses from the front bench. Well, of course, there was also a time when the right honourable gentleman talked about the importance of having an independent trade policy and negotiating our own trade deals. As a full member of the customs union, which he wants, you can't do that. So again, he's gone back on his words in relation to these issues. He talked about the comments that President Macron made in relation to access to waters, and I recognise that this has raised a question among people about the issue in relation to being in the backstop. But for all of those who are concerned, and indeed for all of those who have commented on this, I think it's important to recall that if we were in the backstop, we would be outside the common fisheries policy, and we would be deciding who has access to fish in our waters. He mentioned Gibraltar. I quoted the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, who made very clear, as I did, that this government stood by Gibraltar and we resisted changes to the withdrawal agreement which the Spanish government wished to make. We are clear that Gibraltar's sovereignty will not change. It has not changed, it will not change, and we are proud that Gibraltar is British. He said, I have to say, and finally he talked about dealing with issues of our economy in those parts of the country where we do need to enhance and improve our economy. And I have to say to him, the one thing that is absolutely clear, the one thing that will never deliver for our economy is his policy on borrowing, taxing and spending. It's a balanced approach to the economy that delivers.
Mr. Ian Duncan Smith.
Mr. Speaker, can I recognise my right honourable friend's genuine endeavours in all these matters and just return her to the point about the backstop? Does she recognise the genuine and real concern held on all sides of the House about what would happen if the UK was to be forced into the backstop? And I listened very carefully to what my right honourable friend said, and she said that the UK doesn't want it, that the EU doesn't want it, and we heard the other day that Ireland said that no matter what any agreement, they would never have any hard border. So it makes you wonder, why is it in the withdrawal agreement at all? But the point I want to make to my honourable friend, and the question really is this: if the government, going down the road toward a negotiation, is heading towards that point when the backstop will become invoked, does that not really generally mean that Mr. Macron is right, that we will come under intolerable pressure to agree almost anything to avoid our entry into what my right honourable friend rightly says is something we never want to be in?
No, can I say to my right honourable friend, I do recognise the depth of concern that there has been and that remains for some members of this House about this issue of the backstop. But I disagree with him about the position that would entail. First of all, because, as I indicated in my statement, and it is largely thanks to my right honourable friend and our right honourable friend, the member for North Shropshire, that we are in this position of having within the withdrawal agreement the recognition that there could be alternative arrangements to the backstop or the extension of the implementation period that would deliver for the border of Northern Ireland. But it is right that while I recognise the depth of concern that this is not a situation that the UK wants us to be in, neither is it a situation that the European Union wants us to be in. And the reason is, although strange though it may seem to some members of this House, there are members of the European Union who actively think that the backstop would be a good place for the UK because of its access to the European Union markets without having financial obligations and without free movement. And so that's why they don't want us to be in the backstop either. Neither of us want to invoke it. The Taoiseach has been clear about that. We want to ensure that the future relationship replaces it and delivers our commitment to the people of Northern Ireland.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's deal means Scotland is to be taken out of the European Union against our will and out of the single market, a market which is around 8 times the size of the UK. Mr. Speaker, Scotland voted to remain. Our rights must be respected. Living will rip away jobs, hit living standards and end freedom of movement, something that will make it harder for our precious NHS to attract and retain the staff that we need. Migration has been good for Scotland. The Prime Minister talks about queue jumpers from Europe, an outrageous slur against EU citizens that come here. But she blatantly disregards the rights that we will all lose to live and work in Europe. Mr. Speaker, we are not prepared to give up these rights. The Prime Minister's deal carries no majority in this House and has split her own benches. It means a blindfold Brexit is now certain. There is no long-term agreement on our trading relationship with Europe. It is a deal full of ifs and buts. Crucially, here we are again, with another sellout to the Scottish fishing industry by a Tory government. Well, we've been here before. We were sold out by Ted Heath and we've been sold out repeatedly by Tory governments. Under this agreement, fishing boats registered in Northern Ireland would continue to gain zero tariff access to the EU and UK markets, but fishing boats registered in Scotland and other parts of the UK would not. We now know that the EU will start negotiations based on existing quota shares. Mr. Speaker, that's not taking back control of our waters. It is the EU exercising an effective veto. That's right. Scottish fishing communities have been duped once again by the Conservatives. We on these benches we cannot accept this sellout from the Conservatives. I call upon the Secretary of State for Scotland and the DEFRA Secretary. Search your conscience because your fingerprints are all over this. The agreed declaration states that the transition period after leaving the EU could be extended by 1 or 2 years. Does the Prime Minister accept that that means that the UK would almost certainly be in the CFP with no voting rights for another 1 or 2 years, totally contrary to what the Scottish Secretary has said? The Prime Minister says this deal ends uncertainty. It does not end uncertainty for Scotland's fishing sector or for the future state of the economy, which faces years of turbulence and a bureaucratic tangle. Mr. Speaker, there is talk of a Brexit TV debate. Will the Prime Minister debate with the First Minister of Scotland? Mr. Speaker, the way Scotland's interests have been dismissed by the UK Government throughout this process demonstrates the real cost of not being an independent country able to take our own decisions. The day will come, Mr. Speaker, where Scotland will be an independent country. Mr. Speaker, we on these benches will continue to work across parties to put in place a deal that works for Scotland, and we will support another referendum on EU membership.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll address the 2 main points. The Right Honourable Gentleman once again gave most of his comments over to the question of fishing, but he mentioned the question of migration. I think it is important that we deliver on what people voted for at the referendum, and they voted for an end to free movement. And that is because they felt that it was not right that people had a right to come here, were freely able to move here based on the country they came from rather than their contribution to the United Kingdom. We will be able to put in place a skills-based immigration system that is based on people's skills and their contribution to our economy. And then he's devoted the majority of his comments to the whole issue of the common fisheries policy. He talked about a sellout of Scottish fishermen. The real sellout of Scottish fishermen is the SNP's policy to stay in the common fisheries policy. Who is it who has been standing up for Scottish fishermen in this House? Conservative Scottish backbenchers. Never. All the Scottish Nationalist Party want to do, is stay in the common fisheries policy, and that indeed would be a sellout of Scottish fishermen.
Mr. David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the European Union really intends in good faith to rapidly negotiate a future trade agreement, why can we not make the second half of the £39 billion payment conditional on delivering it?
As my right honourable friend is aware from the early negotiations that we held on this particular issue, the £39 billion has been determined in relation to our legal obligations. I think it is important that as a country we are a country that stands up to our legal obligations. As my right honourable friend will also know, there is a timetable for these payments spread over a period of time, and of course a key element of this is ensuring that we're able to have that implementation period, which is so important for our businesses, to ensure that they only have to make one set of changes and that there's a smooth and orderly withdrawal.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. By refusing to make choices now about our future economic relationship with the European Union, what the Prime Minister has done is to put off the moment when we will have to make those choices to a time when the EU will have much greater leverage over this country. Because any future trade agreement will require the unanimous approval of every European member state. How can the Prime Minister expect the House to vote to put the country in such a weak position? Is this not the biggest failure of this negotiation?
The right honourable gentleman, I'm sure, is very well aware of the position that the European Union cannot sign a trade agreement with... we are looking for that free trade area, that being at the heart of our economic partnership for the future. The European Union is not able to sign that and to develop the legal text for that until we are a third country, until we have withdrawn from the European Union. But far from not setting out details of our future relationship, the political declaration does just that and makes it very clear that this is the set of, if you like, instructions to the negotiators that the future relationship will put into place what is in the political declaration.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as it currently stands, the majority of honourable and right honourable members in this place will not vote in favour of the Prime Minister's deal, despite her very best efforts. So she needs Plan B. What is the Prime Minister's Plan B? Is it Norway plus the single market, the customs union, which some of us have been arguing for over 2 years?
I'm tempted to say to my right honourable friend that throughout the last 18 months of negotiations, at virtually every stage, people have said to me that it was not going to be possible for me to negotiate a deal with the European Union. No sooner do I negotiate a deal with the European Union than people are saying, well, what's the next thing you're going to do with the European Union? But in all seriousness, I say to my right honourable friend this. We will have a number of days of debate in this chamber prior to the meaningful vote on this deal. I believe it is important that when people look at this deal and come to that vote, they consider the interests of this country, they consider the interests of their constituents, and they consider the importance of delivering on Brexit.
Sir Vincent Cable.
Now that the Prime Minister has decided to launch a public debate on her plans, should she not move beyond her comfort zone of debating with Brexit fellow travellers like the leader of the Labour Party and engage with the much larger cross-party coalition in favour of a people's vote with the option of remaining in the European Union? Will she not debate with the real opposition?
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he and his honourable friends have asked me this question about the people's vote, the second referendum, on a number of occasions, and my answer to that has not changed. I believe it is important, having given the choice to the British people as to whether we stay in the European Union, that we now deliver on the choice that the British people made. That is a difference of opinion between myself and him, I recognise that, but actually I think the majority of the British public want us to get on with doing what they asked us to.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister appreciate that the withdrawal agreement is incompatible with the Withdrawal Act of 2018, which expressly repeals the whole of the European Communities Act 1972. In this event, we would truly regain our laws. Does the Prime Minister accept that this agreement, being only a treaty, cannot override the statutory provisions of the 2018 Act and is therefore unlawful? Did she seek the legal opinion of the Attorney General on this question in good time before the agreement was signed by her yesterday, as required under the Ministerial Code?
I say to my honourable friend, I make 2 points to my honourable friend. The first is, of course, what the Withdrawal Act does. One of the things the Withdrawal Act does is bring European Union law into UK law, such that there is that smooth and orderly transition when we leave the European Union. And, of course, the Withdrawal Agreement will be implemented in our legislation through the Withdrawal Agreement Act.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says in her statement the legal text is now also clear that once the backstop has been superseded, it shall cease to apply. Now, we need accuracy. Actually, in page 309, Article 2 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, it says the backstop can be superseded in whole or in part and shall cease to apply in whole or in part. So we need accuracy here because it's the legal text that matters, and this is what will bind the country. Will the Prime Minister tell us, as the Chancellor has rightly said, that the backstop is bad for the Union, bad for the economy? That's what he has said. Can't you tell us what bits are so bad for the Union?
The parts of the backstop that are bad for the European Union, that they consider... for the United Kingdom. Yes, well, this is what we want to be able to do, is in the future to be able to have our independent trade policy. One of the issues in relation to the backstop is whether or not we would be able to do that. That's one of the issues that we would not want to see within us continuing to be in the backstop for.
Mr. Boris Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, I congratulate my right honourable friend on beginning her campaign to sell this deal to the country with the frank admission just now that it is unsatisfactory. I may say I think that is a bit of an understatement, because it's very hard to see how this deal can provide certainty to business or to anyone else when you have half the Cabinet going around reassuring business that the UK is effectively going to remain in the customs union and in the single market, and the Prime Minister herself continuing to say that we are going to take back control of our laws, vary our tariffs, and do, as she said just now, real free trade deals. They can't both be right. Which is it?
Can I, first of all, might point out to my right honourable friend what I said in my statement was that neither we nor the EU were entirely happy with the backstop arrangements that were put in place. That is accurate. I've referenced one reason why we're not happy with it, and I've referenced earlier in answers why the European Union are not happy with it. We will be able to. I recognise a concern that's been expressed about our ability to negotiate free trade deals with other countries on the basis of the arrangement that we're putting in place with the European Union for our future relationship. We will be able to negotiate those free trade deals. But I think every member of this House should be aware that when those trade deals are being considered, there will be issues that this House will want to consider, which will be nothing to do with whether or not we have a particular relationship with the European Union. This House will want to consider animal welfare standards. This House will want to consider environmental standards. These are the issues which members of this House will want to consider when they look at those free trade deals. But it is absolutely clear we will be able to negotiate those free trade deals with the relationship that is being proposed.
Dick Cooper.
It isn't a deal for the future, it's just a stopgap. We still don't know whether this means Chequers or Canada or Norway or an endless backstop or something worse or a massive security downgrade. We have no idea where this is heading, and other countries are already saying that this gives them more leverage because it reduces our negotiating power. How can she say that this is in the future interest of the country? She used to say that nothing was agreed until everything was agreed. Right. When did she change her mind?
Yeah. First of all, I would point out to the Right Honourable Lady that what this political declaration does is set out very clearly the basis for the future relationship that we will be having on security and economic arrangements with the European Union. And it also set out clearly that it's in the clear intent of both parties to develop in good faith agreements giving effect to this relationship. This is not about some other sort of relationship, it is about what is in this document. And she asked whether it's Canada or Norway. I said right at the very beginning of this process that we should get away from thinking of on-the-shelf models that exist already. What is being proposed here and what is acknowledged from the European Union is a relationship of unprecedented depth which has not been offered to any other major advanced economy. It is a relationship which shows that we are not just another third country.
John Redwood.
Will she agree that this agreement could cost a lot more than $39 billion, as there are no cash limits or figures in it and lots of liabilities, especially if the EU goes as slow on the next phase of the negotiations as the last lot and drag us into permanent transition at enormous cost?
Can I say to my right honourable friend that there are, as he will know, there are clauses within this withdrawal agreement in relation to the endeavours that both sides will make to reach agreement by the end of the implementation period in December 2020 that make it clear that action can be taken if either side drags its feet in the way that he is talking about.
Mr. Leslie.
The Minister's not suggesting that, compared with staying in the European Union, her Brexit proposals would mean that our country would be economically better off, is she?
Whether the question as to our future, no. Because I do believe that we can be economically better off outside the European Union. But the problem is there are those who think that the only factor that determines how well off we are in the future is whether or not we're a member of the European Union. I differ. Our future is in our hands. It will be our decisions in many areas that will determine our prosperity for the future.
Sir Michael Fallon.
Well, nobody can now doubt that the Prime Minister has tried her very best. Are we not nonetheless being asked to take a huge gamble here? Paying, leaving, surrendering our vote and our veto without any firm commitment to frictionless trade or the absolute right to dismantle external tariffs. Is it really wise to trust the future of our economy to a pledge simply to use best endeavours?
I say to my right honourable friend that the position in relation to the nature of the political declaration is exactly what I set out in response to the question from the chairman of the EU Exit Select Committee, which is that it is not possible for us to sign that legal treaty in terms of a free trade agreement with the European Union until we are outside the European Union.
Kate Hoey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister was told very clearly last November that any backstop would not be tenable and would not be acceptable, and she's carried on with allowing it to be put in. But not only is it is in a way that we can't actually get out of it unless the EU allows us. Isn't that really not giving back sovereignty to our country, to the people who voted to leave?
I say to the Right Honourable Lady, as I said in my statement, the position is very simple. There is no withdrawal agreement without a backstop. Without a backstop, there is no deal. And that is because of the commitment that both sides wanted to give to the people of Northern Ireland to ensure there was no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. That is very simple. Any other arrangement, any other agreement on trade with the European Union would have a backstop.
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Brexit debate has seen false promises made to the public from all sides and from all parties. Democracy only works when it can be based on a debate of truth and honesty and fact. How can the Prime Minister reassure the House that this debate we're about to have now on her deal is based on facts and evidence and not more false promises to the British people which, when broken subsequently, will damage trust in our democracy even more.
I say to my right honourable friend that we are committed as a government to publishing analysis of this deal, we will publish analysis of the various aspects of this deal. As she's aware, there are others out there that are looking at the economic aspects as well. I'm tempted to say this, though. She asked whether this can be based on facts. I think it would be an interesting debate for this House as the extent to which economic forecasts can actually be described as facts.
Ben Bradshaw.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for the efforts that she made personally on behalf of my constituent Matthew Hedges, who has been released this morning. A bit of good news amidst all this Brexit mess. But on Brexit, if she is so confident that the public support this deal, why doesn't she ask them?
Can I first of all thank the right honourable gentleman for his earlier remarks about his constituent. And I have responded to the question about this second referendum issue before, and it's very simple. I think that it is absolutely right that this House and politicians should see it as a duty to implement the vote that the British people gave to leave the European Union.
Steve Baker.
When my right honourable friend describes the functioning of her free trade area, it sounds awfully like a comprehensive customs union. Can she just be absolutely clear where we're headed? Will we never reach the point where there are customs declarations?
My honourable friend is well aware of the position that the government takes, which is that we will be working for frictionless trade. As he will see, the references in the political declaration are for an ambitious agreement in relation to the restriction of checks. But my honourable friend will also be aware that obviously there is a balance between the rights in terms of access, frictionless access, against the obligations. That is set out quite clearly in the document. As my honourable friend knows, the government set out its position in the summer in the White Paper.
Caroline Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says a majority of people want her to get on with Brexit, but actually that isn't true. It might be an inconvenient fact, but the truth is a majority do want a people's vote. So when she's giving her tour around the country,
Order. The Honourable Lady is entitled to ask her question without being consistently shouted at. I thought we were talking about respect in the chamber. Try remembering it. Well, maybe somebody who says, were we, doesn't care about that, but most of us do, and I want to hear the Honourable Lady and the response to the Honourable Lady. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard that the Prime Minister is planning to tour the country to sell her bungled deal to the public. Why doesn't she try listening to the public rather than having a stage-managed opportunity just to hear a whole load of waffle? Why can't people actually have the chance to have their say in a people's vote? If she really trusts them, she would do it.
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that I've answered the question of the people's vote earlier, but I do listen to the public, and when I go knocking on doors asking and listening to people when they say, the overwhelming view is get on with it and do what the vote said.
Owen Patterson.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative manifesto at the last election promised to deliver the Leave vote by leaving the single market, leaving the customs union and leaving the remit of the ECJ. Many of us, endorsed by experienced lawyers, believe that this document does not deliver that. It also is a clear breach of the principled consent of the Belfast Agreement, and it's going to cost us £39 billion. As a majority across the House, including myself, Mr. Speaker, intend to vote against this deal, at this late stage, would the Prime Minister acknowledge that the obstacle to President Tusk's offer of a free trade deal was the problem of the Northern Irish border? In her political declarations, she's acknowledged that current techniques and process can sort that. Will she therefore please, at this late stage, look to a comprehensive free trade deal with our solution to the Northern Ireland border?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, at the heart of this political declaration, at the heart of our future economic partnership, is a comprehensive free trade deal. It's just a better comprehensive free trade deal than Canada.
Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the Prime Minister's Minister's lexicon, is smooth and orderly the new strong and stable?
A smooth and orderly exit is what business wants, and I'm sure what citizens want up and down this country.
Mr. Mark Francois. Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, there is one thing on which we can all agree, which is that when we come to vote on this in 2 weeks' time, this will be about the most important thing that those of us in this House will ever vote upon in our entire lives. Now, The Sun and The Telegraph this morning described this deal as a surrender.
Daily Mail does.
I'm afraid it is. No sooner is the ink dry than the Spanish are after Gibraltar and the French are after our fish.
They're not. It's not what you want to say.
Prime Minister.
Order. Sit down. Order. Let me say to members around the right honourable gentleman, including some who fondly imagine they're going to be called to ask a question, don't sit there heckling your colleague. He's got a right to be heard. If you don't like it, listen with courtesy in silence, and if it's that bad for you, you're welcome to leave the chamber. The right honourable gentleman will be heard. Amen. End of subject. Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister and the whole House knows the mathematics. This will never get through. And even if it did, which it won't, the DUP on who we rely for a majority have said they would then review the confidence and supply agreement. So it's as dead as a dodo. Prime Minister, I plead with you. The House of Commons has never, ever surrendered to anybody, and it won't start now.
Hear, hear. And can I reassure my right honourable friend, as I referenced in my statement in relation to Gibraltar, that the United Kingdom has not surrendered in those matters that he has referred to. He talked about the Spanish position on Gibraltar. The Spanish have always had that position on Gibraltar. He talked about the French wanting our fish. As he will know, French fishermen have long been wanting and fish in our waters. What they did want to do in the political declaration was to link that access to our waters to our access to markets in relation to trade. We resisted that. We continued resisting that, and we resisted it in the document itself. And we will continue to resist that and continue on Gibraltar to stand by the people of Gibraltar.
Mr. Barry Shearman.
The Prime Minister deserves some sympathy trying to front up that divided mob behind her. But the fact of the matter is, she used a term in her remarks, it ain't going to happen, or isn't going to happen. What isn't going to happen is quite right. She is not going to get a majority in this House for this deal because it would leave the British people worse off. And a growing concern now is that many of my constituents want us to assert parliamentary supremacy on this, which she mentioned in her Lancaster House speech, and let us get back into the European Union where people will get a better deal at the end of the day.
Well, the right honourable gentleman talks about parliamentary supremacy. Of course, it was this Parliament that decided overwhelmingly to ask the British people their view on our membership of the European Union. They voted, they gave that view, and I believe it is our duty to deliver on it.
Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all thank my right honourable friend for making 3 statements to the House of Commons in 10 days, which I think is boycottian in its achievement. To an earlier question, the Prime Minister said that we had a legal obligation to pay £39 billion. I wondered if she's forgetting the report of the House of Lords from March 2017 that said in the event of leaving without a deal we owed no money at all. Therefore, what are we buying with £39 billion of taxpayers' money?
Can I assure my honourable friend that I have not forgotten the House of Lords report, but there is a different opinion in relation to the House of Lords report, and that opinion is that there are legal obligations that this country would hold to the European Union in relation to financial payments in any circumstances. As I've said before, I think it's important that we are a country that upholds our legal obligations.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow I'll be part of a cross-party group of Scottish parliamentarians
parliamentarians from the SNP, the Labour Party and the Scottish Green Party who are going to the Court of Justice in Luxembourg to establish that it would be possible for this Parliament to tell the Prime Minister to revoke her Article 50 notice. Does she share my sense of pride that it will be Scottish parliamentarians and the Scottish courts that will give this Parliament a true alternative to her deeply flawed deal?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that I know she has consistently raised this issue of the revocation of Article 50, and as she knows, it is not going to happen because it is not government policy.
Joe Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said in her statement and in various letters that her deal will protect jobs. Could I ask her, please, to tell me which region or regions of the United Kingdom will be more prosperous with higher productivity and higher GDP per capita than they do and than they will under present arrangements within the EU?
I say to my honourable friend that the answer to that question is the extent to which we are able to enhance the prosperity and the number of jobs in regions of the United Kingdom depends on a whole variety of decisions that will be taken by this government. It is our good management of the economy that's ensured that 3.3 million jobs have already been created. And if my honourable friend remembers the budget that was given in November, he will also have seen the OBR's prediction that 800,000 jobs will be created over the next period of years in this country.
Stella Creasy.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been very clear this afternoon that she doesn't think it is right that the public, having had a vote to leave the European Union, should have a say on what happens next on the deal that she has done. Can she therefore confirm that if this House votes down her deal, she will not seek to force a second vote on this deal? Or will we find out, as the DUP have, that it's one rule for her and no say for anyone else?
Say to the Honourable Lady that I will be working to ensure and persuade members of this House that this is the deal that is on the table. This is a deal that delivers on the vote of the British people, and it does so while protecting jobs, protecting our security and protecting our United Kingdom.
Sir Bernard Jenkin.
Will my right honourable friend recall how much we both hoped, so much that I would be able to support whatever the Prime Minister brought back from her negotiations? Can I say how sad I am I cannot possibly support this deal, which pays £38 billion simply to kick the can down the road? And how can we possibly agree to an arrangement at the moment where we have the unilateral right to leave the European Union, but we have no such unilateral right to leave these new arrangements, which will be subject to an EU veto? That's giving up control, not taking back control.
That's right. As I set out in my statement, various elements relating to the backstop, which is what my right honourable friend has referred to. Of course, looking at the future treaty arrangements which will cover security partnership and the economic partnership, I would expect that, as in any trade agreements, there would of course be appropriate arrangements for review and for the question of the potential termination of those relationships. I repeat the point that I have made previously in relation to the £39 billion. I think it would be wrong for this House to believe that there were no legal obligations to pay money to the European Union that the United Kingdom has on leaving. There are legal obligations to pay money to the European Union, and I think it is important that we abide by those obligations.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The National Institute of Economic and Social Research published a report today that shows that this deal would make the UK £100 billion a year worse off by 2030. That equates to £1,000 per person per year. If the Prime Minister really believes the majority of the UK want that outcome, can I politely suggest that she's not knocking on enough doors? And will she commit to giving the nation a final say on the exact terms of her deal?
Say to the Honourable Lady that I have responded on a number of occasions this afternoon, and indeed in other occasions when I've given statements to this House, on the question of a second referendum.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Saturday morning, our right honourable friend the Chancellor
told the Today programme that as the UK is split down the middle over the European Union, and I quote, "Anything which looks like one half of the country winning and the other half losing would be disastrous. In that case, may I ask, does the Prime Minister agree with him? And if so, what was the point of holding the referendum in the first place?"
Can I say to my honourable friend, I think the point is a very simple one. Now is the time for this country to come back together again. It is a time for us to recognise that in delivering on the Brexit deal that people voted, leaving the European Union that people voted for in 2016, we are meeting the instruction we were given by people in that referendum. We are doing it in this deal in a way that protects jobs and livelihoods and our security and our United Kingdom. And now is the time for the country to come back together, to get behind this deal and to ensure we can build a better future for all.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister managed to insult and upset over 3 million European citizens who live and work in this country. Over 150,000 of them, like my German husband, a GP here for over 30 years, felt absolutely thrown away when they have spent decades here looking after us when we're ill. Will the Prime Minister take this opportunity, perhaps, to apologise for her thoughtless and insulting comments?
Can I say to the honourable lady, I should not have used that language in that speech. The point I was making was a simple one, and I may say to her, right from the very beginning, I said that citizens' rights was a key issue that I wanted to see addressed in the withdrawal agreement. That was one of the things we put at the top as one of our priorities, and we have delivered that in the withdrawal agreement for people. But can I also say to the honourable lady that I think there was a point that for the most people here in the United Kingdom, they want to see people coming to this country with the skills and wanting to make a contribution. Her husband has made a contribution as a GP here in this country. They want people to be judged, as we will, on their skills and contribution to our economy, rather than simply on where they come from.
Nicky Morgan.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that it's the easiest thing in the world for people to criticise any deal that they haven't spent time and it's the easiest thing in the world for people to remain in their entrenched positions that they've been in for the last 2 years? But actually the braver thing and the right thing for this country now is to challenge ourselves on our views of Brexit, to step up to the plate as elected representatives and to give this deal the scrutiny that it needs, to read carefully the economic forecast the government is going to publish, and to realise that what will cost us far more than £39 billion is a no-deal Brexit to be avoided.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, and I think this was a point that was made very well by our right honourable friend, the member for Rayleigh, that this is a very important moment for this country. And that is why when people come to debate this topic and to vote on this topic, I hope they will look, as she has said, look at what is set before them in terms of analysis, look at the details of the deal, recall the need to deliver for the British people on the vote of Brexit, but also recall the need for us to consider our constituents' jobs and livelihoods for the future. This is a very serious... debates in this House are all about serious matters, but this is an historic moment for our country, and it's right that we approach it in the right way.
Frank Field.
Does the Prime Minister accept that should we have to use the backstop, we can only escape if the whole of the rest of the EU gives us permission to do so, and that they are in a position to demand any ransom to gain our exit?
It is possible to come out of the backstop if it is shown that it can be superseded by the future relationship or by alternative arrangements that can be put in place. The key is being able to show that we're delivering on the commitment for the people of Northern Ireland in relation to the border.
Priti Patel.
Speaker, the Prime Minister in her statement speaks of the European Court of Justice and how this deal ends the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice. So can my right honourable friend give a precise date or even a year when the UK will no longer be bound or subject to or have imposed on it any judgments from the European Court of Justice?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, as she will, I'm sure, recall from the one of the elements of the citizens' rights section within the withdrawal agreement does have a period of time where it will be possible for the issues in relation to citizens' rights to be considered by the European Court of Justice. After that point, there will be no jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the United Kingdom. In all other matters, there will be no jurisdiction of the Court of European Justice in the United Kingdom prior to that point. There is a limited range of issues that can be considered in relation to citizens' rights during that drawdown period. It will be the case that people will not be able to take cases to the European Court of Justice in this country. It will be the case that it will be our courts who are determining and interpreting our laws.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm genuinely sorry to say this to the Prime Minister, but there is a stark difference between stoic determination and sheer stubbornness and a failure to listen to this House or to the people. She's come here today with the same old script, telling us that we've got to vote for this piece of paper that will make us poorer, weaker, less influential, less well-off, less secure, and she expects to get the consent of this House. And she said as a result she wants to appeal over our heads and go to the people. If she wants to go to the people, why is she afraid to put this question to a people's vote?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I have answered the question of a people's vote on a number of occasions. But I say this to the honourable gentleman as well. I believe in actually delivering on the vote of the British people that took place in 2016 for the reasons that I've set out. But for those who consider that a second vote of some shape or form would do anything other than divide this country further or create more uncertainty, I think they only have to look at what happened during the initial referendum campaign. We asked people to choose, they chose, it's our duty to deliver.
Dame Caroline Spellman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So many young people in my constituency have got work in the car industry whose principal market is in Europe. But car manufacturers warn us that no deal could result in tariffs of £4.5 billion. So can my right honourable friend confirm that her hard-won deal would provide much-needed certainty, continuity and, above all, safeguard jobs?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend, I recognise the importance of the automotive industry in her constituency and many others around the country, and indeed the political declaration on the tariff issue expressly provides for no tariffs.
Ronnie Campbell.
Prime Minister, will this agreement that you've sought stop a federal Europe, us joining a federal Europe, stop with joining the euro and never to join it, and stop the dictates and the stupid laws coming from Europe? Because the way I see it, we've got 2 feet in, with 1 arm out.
I think I can give the honourable gentleman comfort on all of the points that he makes. The point is we're coming out of the European Union, so if they choose to go down and push down to a more federal Europe, then we won't be part of that. We're not a member of the euro. We're not proposing. We're coming out of the European Union, so we will certainly not be in the euro, and we will be making our laws.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, could my right honourable confirm that under her leadership this United Kingdom will never ever become a vassal state? But could she also confirm that if naked self-interest on either side of this House prevails over national interest, we could end up as an impoverished state?
I'm very happy to give my honourable friend the confirmation on the first point that he made. Of course, the proposals that we have put forward in relation to our future economic relationship ensure that it will be Parliament that will be determining our laws. And I think everybody in this House, when it comes to this vote, should be considering and putting first the national interest and not their own or their party political interest.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The official note of yesterday's Council meeting states, and I quote, "A fisheries agreement is a matter of priority and should build on, inter alia, existing reciprocal access and quota shares. When you compare that to the Prime Minister's statement today, you can understand, Mr Speaker, why our fishermen are anxious. This situation only arises because the Prime Minister agreed to include fisheries in the transitional arrangements. With the benefit of hindsight, does she now agree that that was a mistake?
Right, honourable gentleman, that is not the case. I think what he is quoting from is the minutes of the Council meeting at 27, which has a number of issues in it, which actually show, and because yes, there are other member states do have concerns in relation to a number of these issues. Partly they have those concerns because they were not able to arrive at the position that they would have preferred to have in the political declaration that we have agreed with the European Union, because we have resolutely stood up for our fishermen.
Mr. Donny-Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know my right honourable friend has been working hard in what she sees as the best interests of the country, and it has been a pretty thankless task. But I have to say to her, I do worry when I read at the weekend her letter to the British people, which sets out a picture of the future which seems to me to be at clear variance with any rational analysis of the text in relation to the political declaration. How can we seriously say to people that the Northern Ireland backstop will not act as a fetter on our future freedom of action? How can we say that we're going to lose the jurisdiction of the ECJ when it is in fact going to continue to play a major part in our lives for the foreseeable future? Wouldn't it be better, if we're going to have an informed debate, that we are completely transparent with the sorts of problems that we are going to have to face when we get through the stage, if she succeeds in her motion in 2 weeks' time, of leaving the EU on the 29th of March? The truth of the matter is that our problems have hardly begun.
Of course it is the case, as I've explained the reason why earlier, that we have to negotiate the full legal text of the future economic partnership and the future security partnership. My right honourable and learned friend, I know, will understand the reason for that. But what is important is that what we have here in this political declaration is a set of instructions to the negotiators on the basis on which that future relationship will be set. And that is one which in trade terms is ambitious and unlike any other given to any other third country, and in security terms too is unlike any other given to the third country, because it is more ambitious, closer and a better partnership than any other country has.
Mike Gapes.
Can the Prime Minister confirm that if we go back to square one, we will retain a seat, a voice and a vote? We will stay in the single market and the customs union, and we will be a better place than we would be in the backstop?
No, we're leaving the European Union, and we're leaving on the 29th of March 2019.
Very quickly. Mrs Anne Main.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend, in her answer to the honourable member for Birkenhead, said we can leave the backstop if it can be shown that we have met the criteria. Could I ask who's going to be the arbiter of when it is shown, and who we are accountable to make sure that they will allow us to leave?
It goes. The initial discussion, of course, takes place between the two parties of the United Kingdom and the European Union. But there is a process that goes through the joint committee of the two bodies. But there is also an arbitration panel, an arbitration process which can be brought into operation in relation to that, because throughout the withdrawal agreement, in various elements, it refers to the good faith on both sides. And if it is the case that the commitment to Northern Ireland has been met, then I think it would be clear that we would be able to come out of the backstop, were it the backstop that had been put in place in the first place.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the problems that the Prime Minister has had to grapple with over the last 2 years is that those who campaigned to leave the European Union had no blueprint for what they would do if they won the referendum. But the government are now repeating that mistake. So can the Prime Minister tell the House what plans are being put in place if, as it now seems seems likely, the government loses the vote on the 12th of December. What preparations are
50 and the People's Vote question in response to other questions? And my focus is on this deal and the fact that this is the deal that is good for the United Kingdom because it delivers.
to North and have a meaningful discussion about how we make sure that when it comes to workers' rights, health and safety, we do not fall behind and we secure a sustainable customs arrangement going forward.
Can I say to the Right Honourable Lady that what we have done in the proposals we put forward in the White Paper, what we have done in the political declaration, is to ensure that we do look for that free trade area, that appropriate customs arrangement that is going to deliver on jobs for people. And I'm interested that she has indicated that her Right Honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, is clear that we should leave the European Union with a deal, because previously he had indicated that he would vote against any deal that the government brought back.
Dame Cheryl Gillan.
Nobody can fail to acknowledge the personal commitment and determination and best intentions of the Prime Minister. If this House does not pass the agreement, could the Prime Minister confirm that she has ruled out extending the negotiating period or even purchasing an extension to that period?
The extension of the negotiating period will be an extension of Article 50. I'm clear that we will not extend Article 50 and that we will leave the EU on the 29th of March next year.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, my constituents got the desperate news of 241 job losses at Vauxhall Motors Ellesmere Port, bringing the total to 900 job losses since the referendum. When this government won't even do the basics to help automotive industries, like ending the discrimination on business rates, how on earth, Mr. Speaker, are my constituents supposed to trust this government's political wish list about their economic future?
The Honourable Lady, of course, I'm sorry to hear of the job losses at Vauxhall in her constituency. Can I also say can I also say to the Honourable Lady that there are many examples that we have seen in the automotive industry of extra investment going into this country in the automotive industry. There are many examples we have seen, and indeed she references what the government is doing. Government has been working very closely with the automotive industry. We are keen to ensure that this country is a country that is at leading edge of the automotive industry in the future. Is exactly what we're doing with autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles.
Sir Christopher Chope.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the government published what it describes as the explainer for the political declaration. Page 1 of that explainer includes the following sentence: "The political declaration and the withdrawal agreement have been settled together on the basis that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed." In the light of my right honourable friend's responses to my right honourable friend for Sevenoaks and my right honourable friend for Horton, Price and Howden, why, if that sentence is correct, does it not mean that the £39 billion is contingent upon us getting agreement on the future arrangements?
Can I say the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration were indeed agreed together, but I repeat the point that I've made to others, that it is the case that there, in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in relation to leaving the European Union, there will be legal obligations of a financial nature that this country has to abide by.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, the ink was hardly dry on this agreement before the French President was saying that he would be using the legally binding provisions of this agreement to lever further concessions on fishing and other issues from the UK Government. And other states are no doubt thinking the same. Does the Prime Minister not recognise that by signing this legally binding agreement, she is handing the EU a cudgel which it will use to mug us for the second time when it comes to the negotiations on the future trade arrangements?
No, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, no, I don't agree that. And I referenced earlier, and I'm happy to do so again, the remarks that were made by the French President in relation to the backstop and in relation to access to fishing. And I will repeat the point, which is a very simple one, which is if the backstop is exercised, we will be outside the common fisheries policy, and it will be the United Kingdom that would determine which boats have access to UK waters.
Yeah. Stephen Crabb.
Agree that as a party of government we have a responsibility not just to embody the divisions that exist in a country on this issue, but to try to bridge them and to fix them. And to that end, isn't it the case that her deal on the table has the overwhelming advantage of it being the only one grounded in reality that gives us a chance to move forward so we don't keep going around the same mountain again and again?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, first of all, I think he is absolutely right about the responsibility which members of this House have. And secondly, I would say to him this: there are many, in many circumstances, including in this, where people can wish that something was different from what it is. But the reality is, as the European Union has made clear, that there would be no agreement without a backstop. So without a backstop there would be no deal, and that this is the deal. This, I believe, is a good deal for the UK, and I believe it's the right deal for the UK.
Yeah. McKinnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister knows fine well that there is no dividend to be had from this withdrawal agreement. Under all economic analysis, we will be worse off for decades to come. So is it not time for the Prime Minister to level with the British public and accept that because this decision needs to be taken as a political fix rather than an economically rational decision, that it is one that should be put back to the people who started this process back in 2016, and we will continue to ask for that until it does so.
I say to the Honourable Lady, as she has heard, I'm very clear that we should leave the European Union because the vote of the British people was to leave the EU. It may be the policy of others, I don't know if it's the Honourable Lady's, by the sound of it, she would rather we stayed in the European Union. I don't think that would be right. I think that would be betraying the trust that the people put in us.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I urge the Prime Minister, when she hears cries of no surrender, as some members of this House want to drag us to a no-deal Brexit, that would be catastrophic for my constituents in Edinburgh? And can she remind those members of the House that the Conservative manifesto made commitments to a deep and special partnership and a comprehensive customs arrangement with Europe? Does this deal deliver on that?
Yes, I'm happy to tell my honourable friend that this deal does indeed deliver on that manifesto commitment.
Vera Hobhouse.
Mr. Speaker, under this agreement from January 2021, foreign nationals who fly from a third country into Dublin, then travel on to Belfast and from then to the rest of the UK, where will the immigration border be?
The common travel area will continue to exist. That's one of the things that's been agreed in the withdrawal agreement.
Sir Desmond Swain.
To extend the transition or the backstop indefinitely has got to be a trap, hasn't it?
Can I say to my right honourable friend, no, and precisely because of the reasons that I set out. Not only is it clear that that can only be temporary, but it is also the case that that many in the European Union believe that the backstop is actually a place that gives the United Kingdom an advantage which they would not wish to give us.
Pete Wishart.
Mr. Speaker, in some 1 hour and 30 minutes, I think I've heard 3 ringing endorsements for the Prime Minister's Brexit deal. Now, I don't know what that tells me, but I certainly would like to know what it tells her. But will she also confirm today that if she does lose this vote, will she do all her backbench a favour and confirm that she will resign?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I'm focusing on actually ensuring that we ensure that members of this House see the benefits which I believe there are there from this deal. It is a good deal for the UK, and everybody will have a decision to take about their responsibility to deliver on Brexit for the British people when the vote comes.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do have respect for the Prime Minister. I understand her position, but over the past few years we've had very difficult cutbacks to local services in our constituencies, like mine, across the country, and every time we make the case that it is a difficult economy and we did not have enough money. How do I explain to my constituents that we have 39 billion to get out from the Treasury sofa to give to the European Union when it is questionable on whether we owe all that money? And does she not agree that this isn't just about the European Union, this is a matter for social justice?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend that I'm sure that he will recognise that the government's commitments that we have made in a number of areas on our public services in terms of increased funding, which do affect his constituents, I think reflect the needs that he has consistently raised in this House and raised with government. I return to the point that I made previously about the financial settlement with the European Union, that there are legal obligations that this country has, and I believe as a country we should be the sort of place that actually meets our legal obligations.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister must surely now recognise that she's flogging a dead horse. So could I urge her to join forces with senior members of her own cabinet and honourable members across all sides of this House to back a Norway Plus-based Brexit? It's the only option that protects jobs, that solves the Northern Ireland border issue, and that has a chance of reuniting our deeply divided country.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that actually the option that he has put forward does not deliver on the vote of the British people, and that's what I believe we should do.
Mr. David Tredinnick.
Will the Prime Minister agree with me that that which is apparently dead in the water can move on a rising tide? But if she's going to carry the tide with her, she needs to allow herself time, and wouldn't it be better to have a meaningful vote in January after the Christmas vote? And isn't it a truly meaningful vote one that includes the trade negotiations? That's what we should be voting on.
Can I say to my honourable friend that the timing of the meaningful vote, of course, has to reflect not only the need for a sufficient number of days of debate here in this House, but also the need subsequently to get the withdrawal agreement bill through the House before the 29th of March. And I think he virtually gave the Leader of the House a heart attack on the front bench when he suggested delaying the meaningful vote till January.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the backstop applies to Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom is not operating under the backstop in that scenario, is it not the case that the citizens of Gibraltar will actually have more rights than the citizens of this part of Northern Ireland as a part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
No, can I say to the honourable gentleman, the point is that certainly in the Commission's original proposal, it would have been the case that they would have split the customs territory of the United Kingdom, and Northern Ireland would have been treated entirely differently from the rest of the United Kingdom. We resisted that, and that's why we have that UK-wide customs territory, and that was something which they resisted for many months, and that's in the backstop. The UK-wide customs territory is in the backstop.
Sir David Evanet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I firstly pay tribute to my right honourable friend on her dedication and hard work to endeavour to get a Brexit for Britain? However, does she appreciate and understand the real concerns of my constituents that if the backstop is implemented, Britain could remain subservient to the EU for a very long time, if not forever?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend that first, and thank him for his comments in relation to myself and what I've been doing, but can I say to him, I recognise that this concern has been raised, but there are a number of reasons why I believe that concern is met by the arrangements that we have within the withdrawal agreement. It is very clear within the withdrawal agreement that the backstop, if it is implemented, and it does not have to be implemented, but if it is implemented, that it is only temporary. It is clear from the point of view of the European Union that the legal base of the withdrawal agreement is Article 50, and that cannot be used to set up a permanent arrangement. And then finally, of course, it is the case that we have the ability, if the backstop is exercised, to ensure that it is superseded by the future relationship, and it is very clear the intent on developing that future relationship in time for the backstop not to be used is clear throughout the document.
Seema Malhotra.
Mr. Speaker, 78% of our businesses that export do so to the EU and are able to trade goods and services seamlessly. And for the £200 a person that we pay the EU, UK citizens have the right to live, work, study, travel and holiday free of fees and red tape. Some might even describe this as a good deal. But isn't it true, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister's deal and political declaration does little more than take away the biscuit while leaving the nation the crumbs? Isn't it her duty to at least tell the British people how much we are set to lose in every region and nation? And why won't she do that?
Well, first of all, if the Honourable Lady is asking me if the government is going to produce economic analysis, we are.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
Businesses in my constituency point out very firmly that their greatest enemy is uncertainty. And they are now starting to tell me that certainty will be provided by World Trade Organization terms because of the weakness of our negotiating position once we exit the period required for unanimity under the future arrangements. And I say to my right honourable friend that she's now had her government department had 20 months to prepare for there being a straight transfer to World Trade Organization terms. We would have some share of £39 billion to make sure that that transition was worked as effectively as possible by our European Union partners, whose policies would dictate how well that transition went. And surely now, those preparations now need to be surfaced and the European Union engaged in those discussions.
Can I say to my honourable friend that businesses do look for certainty, and certainty is given to businesses in the withdrawal agreement, because it is the withdrawal agreement that contains within it the implementation period that ensures that businesses have that certainty going beyond the 29th of March next year. And as regards the World Trade Organization arrangements for trading with the European Union, I'm frequently encouraged by colleagues around the House to ensure that we can negotiate really good trade arrangements with countries around the rest of the world that would be based not on WTO arrangements. And I have to say that if WTO arrangements are not good enough for those other deals around the world, then I think it is entirely right that we seek to obtain, as we have done, commitments to better than WTO arrangements in our relationship with the European Union.
If the Court of Justice rules tomorrow that Article 50 is revocable, will the Prime Minister institute a British Brexit pause so that she can make a better fist of resolving the disagreements which are so obvious in the House today?
We will not be revoking Article 50 or asking for the extension of Article 50, and we will be leaving the EU on the 29th of March next year.
Drew Bridgen.
Can my right honourable friend confirm that although the withdrawal agreement was voted on by the European Union under qualified majority rules, if it is passed by our Parliament, any future relationship and release from the backstop will be subject to 27 individual EU vetoes, meaning France will demand our fish, Spain will demand Gibraltar, the Republic of Ireland may even demand Northern Ireland, and the only alternative to these humiliating betrayals and capitulations will be continued vassalage forever under the backstop.
Can I say to my honourable friend that obviously the arrangements in relation to the backstop and for the backstop ceasing to apply are those that are set out in the withdrawal agreement, and of course that does end in the potentially end in the arbitration arrangement. Of course, in terms of the future relationship, that will the role that is had by the EU and by individual member states will depend on the precise legal form that that agreement or agreements takes. But of course, if there are areas that are of mixed competence, then there would be a role for national parliaments. If it is only one of EU competence, then of course it is under the sole competence of the EU.
Mrs. Madeleine Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister look at the analysis of information gathered by Best for Britain and Hope Not Hate across Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which shows that 56% of people wish to remain in the European Union now, 66% want a final say in any deal, and 422 constituencies now back Remain. Will the Prime Minister listen to the will of the people, which has changed, and give them a people's vote?
To the honourable ladies, I've said on many occasions, this Parliament gave the decision to whether or not to leave the European Union to the British people, and the British people voted. Now, the honourable lady is saying to me, well, the British people have changed their mind. If we went down the route that she suggests, and there was another vote, and possibly a change of direction, then those who had voted to leave in the first place would quite rightly say, hang on a minute, we need to have another opportunity to vote on this. This is not the way to conduct these arrangements. We decided to give the vote to the British people. We did that. They voted, and we should deliver on that vote.
Sir Hugo Swire.
2017, my right honourable friend said very clearly, we will make sure that no new barriers to living and doing business within our union are created. She went on to say we will bring an end to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in Britain because we will not have truly left the European Union if we are not in control of our own laws. And we are now facing a situation where part of our country is likely to be treated differently, Northern Ireland. And is it not the case that under Article 175 and the dispute mechanism, if both sides can't agree, the ECJ will be the final arbiter?
No. First of all, of course, I would point out that there are regulatory differences already in relation to Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom in limited areas, but those regulatory differences do exist. But I say to my honourable friend, it is not the case that it would be the European Court of Justice that would determine be the final arbiter. That is not what is set out in the withdrawal agreement. It is that arbitration panel that would be making that decision. It would not be the European Court of Justice.
Owen Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister steadfastly and tellingly refuses to say that her Brexit deal will make Britain better off. If she can't offer a guarantee to my constituents that they won't be worse off as a result of this deal, how can she ask me to vote for it?
I expressly said earlier that I believe we can be better off outside the European Union. Yes, but you see, the mistake that I think all too often is made by those who say that the only issue about our future prosperity is whether or not we're a member of the European Union. I disagree with that. The issue about our future prosperity is about us, about decisions that governments and this Parliament take about our economy for the future, and it's about the talents of our people. And I'm optimistic, I'm full of optimism about our prosperity outside the European Union, precisely because of the talents of our people.
John Barron.
The Minister is aware that many of us have wished her well in these negotiations, but it does appear the withdrawal agreement sacrifices much and secures very little. Article 129, paragraph 3, states, and I quote, "The UK shall refrain during the transition period from any action which is likely to be prejudicial to the EU's interests." Given that article, does this mean that the UK will be unable, for example, to cut taxes, to regulate businesses such as Uber, and disagree with the EU foreign policy in the United Nations? And why is this clause not reciprocated by the EU?
No, there's a duty on both sides, actually, to act in good faith during that implementation or transition period. It is not the case the United Kingdom will be able. The United Kingdom does not take, today as a member of the European Union, we do not take a European Union position in the United Nations Security Council. We're an independent member of the United Nations Security Council. We sit there in our own right, and the positions that we take are taken as a United Kingdom. So it is not the case. I disagree. I'm happy to write to my honourable friend further details. I know he raised several points in his question, and I will do that. But I don't believe that the position that he set out there is the correct interpretation.
Phil Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has said previously that this country's best days are ahead. Can I ask the Prime Minister, is that because of the deal that she's negotiated with the EU? And does she think it's actually better than the one we have now?
I believe it is a good deal for the United Kingdom, as I've responded to others as well. It is not. I do believe our best days lie ahead of us. I believe our best days lie ahead of us because of the talent of our people, because of our innovation, because of the decisions that this government has taken to ensure we have a balanced approach to our economy.
Rachel McLean.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. So I would like to put on record my support for the Prime Minister's deal. Not because it's perfect. It does involve compromises, but it's a matter of judgment. When I go around my constituency in Redditch, people say to me they do not want to leave without a deal. There is no precedent for leaving the European Union. This is a completely bespoke process. And can I ask the Prime Minister whether she agrees that she has actually succeeded in defying many critics on all sides? Because she has come back with a deal and she's stood up to the EU in many different respects.
I say to my honourable friend, indeed we have. The UK has stood up rigorously in a number of areas in relation to this deal. Of course, it isn't 100% of what either side would want. That's what negotiations are about. But I believe it is a good deal for the United Kingdom, and I believe it's the right deal for the United Kingdom, and I believe it delivers for people on their vote and for their futures.
We're streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has frequently said during these negotiations that nothing will be agreed until everything is agreed. But looking at the political declaration, is it not now clear that even in the unlikely event that this deal is agreed in its entirety, when it comes to really big issues about our future economic and security cooperation with the European Union, absolutely nothing will have been agreed?
No, the political declaration is a clear set of instructions to the negotiators on the legal text. I have also, in the past, on a number of occasions, made clear the position in relation to the European Union not being able to sign a legal treaty with a country in relation to these trade matters until that country is a third country.
Mr. Marcus Fish.
123,000 defence industry jobs nationwide. Our security and that of our allies depend on our defence industry being competitive and flexible with government involvement. Yet, the permanent backstop in the withdrawal agreement that would apply should the EU choose not to do with arbitration would oblige our defence industry to comply with EU state aid law from which EU defence firms are exempt. Why would my right honourable friend give the EU this, yet another hostage to negotiate with? and have us beg to keep our sovereign ability in defence?
Can I say to my honourable friend, first of all, that this is not a permanent backstop, and secondly, that I do not share his interpretation of the question in relation to the defence industry. The issue around, in relation to state aid is a very simple one. In any trade agreement we have with any country around the world, there would need to be elements in relation to matters relating to competitiveness, such as state aid. Now, we put forward a set of proposals in the White Paper in the summer, which did go further than some arrangements that would be in other trade arrangements. But it is not the case that state aid will never be included in trade arrangements. State aid is included in trade arrangements.
Green.
I was agnostic about a people's vote. But now that we can see that the very best deal that the Prime Minister can negotiate will leave us worse off, will give us less say, and rightly is likely to be rejected by this House as not in the best interests of our constituents, should she not in honour go back now to the people?
I refer the honourable lady to the answer I've given earlier on that question.
Alistair Jack.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said in her statement that this House can choose to reject this deal or go back to square one. Can she spell out to the House exactly what square one means?
Well, what I meant in relation to that was I think we will go back to a period of significant uncertainty and division. I think it is important that we recognise that we do have a duty to deliver on the Brexit vote, that we have a duty to do that, taking and having a care for our constituents' jobs and livelihoods and their futures, and this deal delivers on both of those.
Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, why is the £20 billion for the NHS, which has already been announced, now being spun as an additional £394 million a week Brexit dividend for the NHS, when we all know that the savings from membership of the EU will be outweighed by the additional costs that we'll have to pay?
We will be putting extra investment of £394 million a week into our National Health Service. The funding for that will come from a number of sources, but we will be able to use the Brexit dividend on priorities like the NHS and other areas of public service priority.
Whittingdale.
That one of the benefits of leaving the EU is the ability to sign trade agreements with third countries. But can she say what realistic prospect there is for that? Firstly, whilst we remain within the customs union, but even after that, when we have pledged to maintain a deep and regulatory and customs cooperation covering goods, which are likely to be the very goods which people want to sell to us.
I say to my right honourable friend that it is absolutely the case, first of all, that we will be able to sign those free trade arrangements around the rest of the world, and we already have significant interest from various parts of the world in relation to those. Yes, I take the point that my right honourable friend makes about the proposal that we have put forward for frictionless trade, with a commitment, subject to a parliamentary lock, in relation to the Common Rule Book on goods and agricultural products. Many of those rules, of course, are actually international standards. They are not just EU-related standards. They are standards that our manufacturers would be abiding by in any case. And that, I think, is a key issue. I believe that we want to have good trade relations and agreements with the countries around the rest of the world, but also have a good trade relationship and agreement with the European Union.
Paul Farrelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the referendum in 2016, many young people have come of age. And by the end of 2020, many, many more will have done so. But the PM's ruled out a second referendum under any circumstances at any time, and the next general election will only be due in 2022. So could I ask the Prime Minister, what is she afraid of in not allowing these millions of young people a direct say in arrangements with Europe that will affect their future?
It's a question of delivering on the vote that took place in 2016, and I would say, with due respect to the honourable gentleman, that at any point in time somebody can argue that another cohort of young people have come of age and come to a voting age. So at any point in time, if his argument followed, it could be possible to say, well, there needs to be another vote. No, we had the vote in 2016, people voted, and we should deliver on it.
Rebecca Powell.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I was on the railway platform this morning in Taunton, I met with the leader of a very important business in my constituency that employs hundreds of people and trades across the EU, and it's related to the car industry. And do you know what he said to me, Mr. Speaker? He said, please don't jeopardise business, our jobs and the economy. So would my right honourable friend agree with me that we cannot play games with business, and we must have a deal that enables business to thrive whilst at the same time leaving the EU, which is what people wanted? And surely, my right honourable friend, this deal addresses both of those.
Yes, can I thank my honourable friend for bringing the views of the business of Taunton here to the House? But she's absolutely right. We listen to business. That's exactly why that free trade area with those good customs arrangements lies at the heart of our future economic partnership. This deal delivers Brexit, but it does it in a way that enables business to thrive and jobs to be protected.
Dr. Rupa Hutt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is fond of telling us what the British people think. Yeah. And she trumpets freedom of movement, the end of freedom of movement, as a plus of her so-called, well, it's become a face-saving exercise now. But, I mean, for businesses that are losing EU workforce, for EU nationals, 13,000 of them in my seat, and for young people who want to study and live abroad, that and her crass comments about jumping the queue are a tragedy. Isn't it time that she sought a fresh assessment of the will of the people and gave all electors in this 65 million nation, not just 650 MPs, a say? Because what if the will of the people in June 2016 is no longer the will of the people?
I refer the honourable lady to the answer I gave earlier.
Mark Pritchard.
Honourable and good intentions, is it not an indisputable fact, irrespective of whether colleagues voted Remain or Leave, that the political declaration is not legally binding and the withdrawal agreement is legally binding?
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The withdrawal agreement is legally binding. The political declaration is not a legal text because the European Union cannot sign a legal text with a country in relation to trade matters until that country is as a member of the European Union. They can only do it when we're outside the European Union.
Marshal de Cordova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is increasingly clear that the Prime Minister's deal does not have the support of this House. It is a bad deal, it is bad for my constituents and it is bad for the country. So I ask her, and she has not answered this question yet, what is her plan B when this deal inevitably falls?
I refer the honourable lady to the answer I've given earlier.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend for introducing alternative arrangements to the backstop within the lexicography of our Brexit arrangements. That is no mean achievement and may just about get it across the line for a number of us. But can she say what will be done to identify those who are going to work up those alternative arrangements, what budget has been set for that work, and when the matters will be trialled and piloted?
I'm not able to give my honourable friend immediate answers to all of those questions, particularly the questions around trialling and piloting. There are proposals that have been put forward to us. We will be, first of all, I think, here in the UK, obviously looking at those proposals and the extent to which they deliver on what is necessary. And we will be, and have spoken with the European Commission about the possibility then of being able, at an early stage, to discuss with them those alternative proposals.
John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister and at least one of her cabinet ministers has said that if the House rejects her deal, there is a chance of no Brexit at all. And I wonder if she could spell out with greater clarity how this fear might be realised.
I can say to the honourable gentleman that he will have heard a number of individuals around the House today, including some of his colleagues on the Labour benches, who clearly have expressed the view that they believe remaining in the European Union is preferable to leaving the European Union. I believe that it is important for us to deliver on the vote the people took in order and to deliver Brexit.
Gary Streeter.
Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend for living in the real world and for bringing back a deal which does deliver on the 2016 vote without wrecking our economy? Isn't it the case that nobody has put forward a better deal in nearly 2 hours of debate? And does she share my thoughts that isn't it ironic that those who might be scuppering Brexit are the ones who wanted it in the first place?
Well, I think, if I say to my right honourable friend, I think it is absolutely the case that we have not seen an alternative proposal put forward that meets the needs of the British people in terms of the Brexit vote, but also does so in a way that protects jobs and protects our security and our United Kingdom. And as I have said previously, I think when it comes to the vote, we will all need to consider our duty to deliver on the vote of the British people and deliver Brexit.
Jim Shannon.
Speaker, Prime Minister, to both the honourable member for Vauxhall and myself, amongst many other colleagues, you have repeatedly, and I'm quoting from Hansard, stressed, I am clear that we will become an independent coastal state and that we will be able to take back that control. We will be able to make those decisions and negotiate on our own behalf on those issues, rather than it being done by the European Union. Prime Minister, there is no capability to carry out this function in the draft withdrawal agreement. Indeed, we have French and Spanish fishermen boasting already of their continued ability to fish as they currently do in our waters. Can you, Prime Minister, explain exactly how our fishing sector will enjoy the benefits of an independent coastal state with control through this so-called deal? Or is this just another, well, it's the best they will offer us, so we'll have to take it and sell off the fishing industry, as you have done Northern Ireland, and for good measure, throw in a £39 million repayment to the EU as well?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that it is, in a number of elements in the political declaration, it's clear that we will be an independent coastal state. What being an independent coastal state means is that we will be able to determine access to our waters, but of course our fishermen will not just want to be looking at the access that others have to our waters, but also at their access to other waters. So there will be a negotiation with the European Union in relation to access to waters, but it will be the UK that will be negotiating on behalf of the UK in that determination. And I apologise because I forget which particular piece of text it is, but there is a clear commitment that that should be undertaken such that, and because the commitment has been made, that we will be an independent coastal state in December 2020, although the implementation period will not have finished, we will be able to negotiate for 2021, because that's when that negotiation will take place, as an independent coastal state.
Alex Shelbrook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since the summer I have knocked on the front door of over 7,000 of my constituents in Elmo and Rothwell. I've had hundreds of supermarket surgeries, spoken to hundreds of people, and I can say, especially in relation to the comments from the honourable member for Perth and North Perthshire, that not only do the vast majority of my constituents say get behind the Prime Minister and her deal, so do my Executive Council, so do my officers, and so do I. But let me just ask my right honourable friend this. Can she today just put to rest one of the new paranoias doing the rounds that this deal does not sign us up to PESCO, the European Army, and nor indeed have we got any intention of signing up to PESCO or the European Army?
Well, first of all, I thank my honourable friend for his comments, and I can give him that reassurance. The development of PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation, does have the potential to improve Europe's defence capabilities in a way that should be coherent with NATO. But the UK will not this does not require us to or sign us up to participating in the PESCO framework. What it does do is say that we may participate in PESCO projects as a third country, but that, of course, would be a decision for us to take as to whether we wish to apply to do that. But we would not be part of that PESCO framework. And as I said in response to my honourable friend in the statement last week, we are certainly not signing up to a European army, and we would not sign up to a European army.
Mr. David Hanson.
Could the Prime Minister confirm? Could the Prime Minister confirm that we will still be members of Europol and Eurojust, or are we just shadowing and cooperating with them? And also, could she confirm to me what the status is of the European Court of Justice on the European arrest warrant when we've left the European Union under her terms?
The right honourable gentleman will know that what it says in the political declaration is that we will work together to identify the terms for the United Kingdom's cooperation via Europol and Eurojust. We have always said that we recognise, for example, that there may be payment needed to be made to act as a member or have some participation in Europol and Eurojust. But the important point is that the concept of us being part of that, despite being a third country, is in there, and that, I believe, is important. We've had this exchange before across this House, as I believe it's important that we have within this the terms for ensuring that we have surrender arrangements, which are surrender arrangements like the European arrest warrant, and of course the issue of the determination of courts in relation to those surrender matters are a matter which we will be considering, but we are clear that jurisdiction of in these matters is for the UK courts.
Jonathan Ginogly.
Mr. Speaker, and in congratulating the Prime Minister on securing what I believe is a fair and reasonable deal, could I just ask, there will come a time, sometime before July of next year, possibly a lot before, when the Prime Minister will have to take a view as to whether we head towards a possible backstop or whether we increase the implementation period. And I'd just be interested to hear her views as to what considerations might come up as to which route she takes at that time.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. There will be, I think it's July 2020 that is set in the withdrawal agreement as the date by which a decision would be taken. There'll be a number of issues to be taken into account at that stage. The first will be just the key question as to whether the future relationship would not be in place by the end of December 2020 and whether an extended period was therefore necessary of either the backstop or the IP or alternative arrangements. I think the sort of balanced judgment that would be made is, of course, in the implementation period there would be an expectation of a financial obligation. There would not be a financial obligation were we in the backstop. We would not have free movement were we in the backstop. Free movement would almost certainly be required to continue if we were in an extension of the implementation period. So these are the sorts of issues that would need to be balanced at that time.
Anna McMorrin.
Mr. Speaker, this deal leaves us poorer and leaves us negotiating Brexit indefinitely, as is set out in the political declaration in the final paragraph. Hard-working families and workers bearing the brunt of this uncertainty, and this isn't what anyone voted for. So instead of buying off her own side with knighthoods, isn't it time to ask the people what they want and give them the chance to have a final say?
I refer the honourable lady to the answer I gave earlier.
Bob Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer to my declarations in the Register of Interest. I spent much of the weekend talking to businesses in my constituency who urged me to support the Prime Minister's deal, as indeed I shall. But I broke off to listen to what was happening about Gibraltar, because both I and many honourable and right honourable members on both sides of this House and on both sides of the Brexit debate have sought earnestly throughout these last few years to ensure the good interests of the people of Gibraltar. And I appreciate what the Prime Minister said about the way in which the Gibraltar Government and Chief Minister have negotiated and assisted in this matter. Will my right honourable friend agree with me that when the Chief Minister, as well as thanking the Prime Minister personally for her stalwart and unflinching defence, his words of Gibraltar and its interests, says this, and I quote, "The withdrawal agreement she has achieved today protects all of those interests and is the best way for the United Kingdom and Gibraltar to leave behind us 46 years of membership of the European Union in a managed and orderly fashion," those words should weigh very heavily indeed with any member of this House who is committed to the good interests of Gibraltar and the whole British family.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for reminding the House of the comments that the Chief Minister had made in relation to the withdrawal agreement. We were very clear about the coverage of the withdrawal agreement, that it covers Gibraltar, and as I said earlier, we've been working with the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, and I commend him and his team for the work they've put into this, and I think this is an important factor that members should consider when they come to considering their position on this deal.
Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
He's asking a lot for the Prime Minister to look as far ahead as January in all this chaos, but if, as seems likely, she has to put her deal to a second vote and she loses that as well, what happens then? Is she going to step down? Is she going to seek a general election? Or is that the time, finally, to give the people a choice between her deal and staying in the EU to see which they prefer?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I'm looking ahead to December the 11th and to when this House will be faced with a decision as to whether or not it wishes to deliver on the vote of the British people with a deal that not only delivers that vote but also protects their jobs.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
I've listened very carefully to the people of Sleaford and North Wycombe and to the questions of right honourable and honourable members in this House. And it seems to me that the backstop, and in particular its indefinite nature, is clearly a major concern. I welcome the answer that my honourable friend gave to my honourable friend, the member for South West Wiltshire earlier, to say that alternative arrangements are being considered for a backstop. Could my honourable friend tell me how quickly these proposals are being worked up and what commitment we will have and what legal text we will have on them by the time of the meaningful vote on the 11th of December?
Well, can I say to the honourable lady that I cannot promise that there will be that all the work will have been done by the time of the meaningful vote. I have to be honest with the honourable lady on that because considerable work does need to go into these arrangements. But it is significant that we got the alternative arrangements into these documents, such that it would be possible to exercise these rather than requiring the backstop to be put into place. And I recognise the concern that she and other honourable members have about the nature of the backstop. There are a number of reasons throughout the withdrawal agreement why the backstop would only be temporary, and all sides agree that it would only be temporary if it were to be exercised. But she's absolutely right, it's important that we work on those alternative arrangements.
Mr. Kevin Brennan.
Mr. Speaker, my father, who grew up on a farm in the west of Ireland, used to say to me, you should never buy a pig in a poke. And I have to confess, growing up in South Wales, I had absolutely no clue what he meant by that until I read the political declaration and this deal. Isn't one of the reasons it's so unpopular with so many different people right across this House is that it represents nothing more or less than a proverbial political pig in a poke?
Yes, right.
No, it represents a good deal for the people of this country and focusing on a future relationship which delivers a good, comprehensive trade agreement with the European Union, together with a security partnership, both of which are unprecedented in their breadth and depth, I believe is good for the people of the UK.
Yeah. Mr. Shailesh Vara.
Mr. Speaker, in my right honourable friend's response to my right honourable friend, the member for Chingford and Woodford Green, she said that there are and indeed to other members, she said that there are alternatives to the backstop. For the sake of clarity, could she make it clear that if there were to be an extension to the implementation period, and we haven't yet reached an agreement with the European Union, and the extended period expires, would it be the case that the backstop then kicks in, or would it have fallen away?
Reference the situation in which the backstop would cease to apply in the statement that I made, and this was further referenced by the Right Honourable Member, the Leader of the Democratic Unionist Party. The situation that the alternative arrangements that are being looked at and being considered are alternative arrangements which could be in place to provide for the border in Northern Ireland instead of using the backstop or the extension of the implementation period, and crucially to provide for an alternative for coming out of the backstop were it the case that the future relationship was not in place.
Matt Weston.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it the simple truth that by detailing her red lines so early, the Prime Minister negotiated us into a position that was somewhere between a rock and a hard place, except that this weekend it seems she will concede on the rock and we will be left in a hard place? Should the meaningful vote fall, what is the Prime Minister's own backstop?
To the honourable gentleman. First of all, I've been asked that question. I've given an answer to that question on a number of occasions. Secondly, can I just be clear about some of the issues that I set out from the beginning? That we would leave the customs union. We are leaving the customs union. We would leave the single market. We are leaving the single market. We would leave the CAP. We are leaving the CAP. We would leave the CFP. We are leaving the CFP. That we would bring an end to free movement. We're bringing an end to free movement. That we would cease the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the UK. We are doing that as well. We are delivering, I believe, on the vote of the British people, but doing it in a way that protects their jobs.
Nigel Evans.
During the People's Vote of 2016,
every constituency in Lancashire voted to leave the European Union, whether they were a Labour seat or a Conservative seat, and I'm delighted to hear that the Prime Minister has reaffirmed that that is what she intends to deliver. But can she understand why so many people have reservations about this deal, and using the backstop as one area? Can she understand why it's awkward for some people to understand that we're leaving the European Union on the 29th of March next year, but we need to seek permission from the European Union and some independent adjudicator before we can be truly independent of the European Union?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend, I do indeed recall the people's vote of 2016, and I also recognise the concern that he's expressed in relation to the backstop. We cease to become a member of the European Union on the 29th of March next year. Of course, we have agreed with the transition and implementation period that we will continue to operate very much as today in order to give businesses that the smooth and orderly exit that they require, and not have more than one change in the arrangements that they have to put in place. And I repeat, I recognise the concern my right honourable friend has shown in relation to the backstop. But the backstop is there in order to provide for the commitment to the people of Northern Ireland. It would be there in any deal that was done with the European Union. That is very clear. Without a backstop, there would be no deal. And what is important is that we have the different arrangements in place that do enable us to come out of the backstop, but of course always maintaining our commitment to the people of Northern Ireland.
Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the other EU countries discover that they have been asked to agree to something which has got no chance of being agreed by this Parliament, are they not going to be a little annoyed? And would it not have been better to have sought the consent of the elected representatives of the people of this country before seeking the consent of the elected representatives of people of other countries?
It's very simple. Until the EU agreed the deal, there was no deal to bring back to this Parliament.
Victoria Prentice.
Mr. Speaker, we've heard a lot this afternoon about another vote on this issue. I wonder if the Prime Minister could confirm that she both read and remembers the brochure that was sent to all households before the 2016 referendum, in which it stated in bold that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity and the government will enact whatever you decide.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for bringing the House's attention to that document, which is absolutely right. And I think it is absolutely right that when people come to look at this deal, they remember that commitment that was made, that once people had voted, the government would enact that vote, and that's what the government is doing.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has been unequivocal in denying the people a people's vote on her deal. But time and time again in this House, she has refused to concede that her deal makes this country poorer compared to being a member of the European Union. So if she is insistent on making my constituents poorer, and the constituents of everyone in this House, should they not be asked if no Brexit is as good as a bad Brexit?
Be very clear to the honourable gentleman. Nobody is talking about making people poorer. What we are talking about is protecting people's jobs, protecting people's livelihoods, and delivering a deal that delivers on the vote of the British people, and that's what this deal does.
Nick Herbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it not the case that legally the backstop can only be temporary because it is a pathway to a future trade deal, and that therefore descriptions of being trapped in the backstop forever, of becoming a vassal state or even, absurdly, a colony, are overblown and wrong? And should not honourable members look at this deal, which I commend the Prime Minister for having negotiated in the round, because it enables us to deliver on the promise that we made to the British people to implement the decision of the referendum?
Well, can I say to my right honourable friend, I absolutely agree with him. I think it is important that this deal does deliver on the decision of the British people. We committed to deliver on that decision. There are various references, ways within the withdrawal agreement where it is clear that the backstop, if it's invoked, is only temporary, not least the fact, of course, that the withdrawal agreement is on a legal basis of Article 50, and Article 50 cannot be used to establish a permanent relationship.
Patrick Grady.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, I'm quite disappointed to read on Twitter the government's timetabling for the meaningful vote without having had the courtesy of sight of it through the usual channels. But what I wanted to ask the Prime Minister was, my wee sister is due to give birth on the 25th of May to her first child. What is her message to that child? Will that child be a European citizen? And can she honestly say that their life chances and opportunities will be better with this deal than what 78% of my constituents voted for, which is to remain in the European Union?
Can I wish the honourable gentleman's sister well for the future birth of her child, and can I say that I think my message is simply the one that I have given earlier. I believe that there is a truly bright future for this country outside of the European Union. I believe that child, when born and grown up, will have real opportunities open to them that they will not have had previously. And it is up to all of us to work to ensure that we enhance our prosperity, enhance the jobs available for people in this country, so that we do have that bright future in the future.
Mr. Kevin Hollin-Rake.
Does the Prime Minister agree that although the backstop is uncomfortable for the United Kingdom, it's also uncomfortable for the European Union? It allows for free and unfettered trade between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK and the European Union, thereby creating a competitive advantage which the EU is always so keen to avoid. Therefore, it is in everyone's interest to bring the backstop to a conclusion as quickly as possible.
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The European Union does consider the backstop to be a potential area of competitive advantage for the United Kingdom, and he's absolutely right. That's why it is in the interests of both sides, were it invoked, to bring it to an end as quickly as possible.
Martin Whitfield.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for her statement and draw her attention to the phrase where she says that the withdrawal agreement protects the rights of EU citizens living in the UK and UK citizens living in the EU so they can carry on living their lives as before. Does this mean that UK citizens who are in receipt of state pensions in the EU will have those uprated annually, as with state pension holders in this country, and will that continue after the transition period?
The arrangements in relation, as he will have seen if he looks at the political declaration, there is a reference in there to the need to still negotiate some of the arrangements in relation to certain benefits such as pensions under the future trading relationship.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I thank my right honourable friend for all her work and for this statement. 80% of the UK's economy, at least, is services, and we know that the European Union has still not completed the single market in services after 25 years. In her statement, she spoke about liberalisation in trade in services well beyond WTO commitments and building on recent EU free trade agreements. How much difference does she think there will be for services between what we have at the moment and what we will be able to negotiate under the political declaration?
Well, I think the key element of the political declaration is that it does give us, first of all, it gives us a greater freedom in relation to the negotiation on services, because this is an area, as he says, where it has not been developed, the single market has not been developed by the European Union. And secondly, I think it is important, and this again was something that it was quite hard fought, to get a recognition that the future relationship in relation to services should go beyond and could go beyond those that existed in other free trade agreements, because this is an area that has not been well developed in other free trade agreements, and it is to our advantage, of course, as a United Kingdom, given, as he says, the importance of services to us, to be able to develop this in this relationship with the European Union, but of course with other countries around the world, rest of the world as well.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The man who wrote Article 50 himself, Lord Kerr, has said today that the characterisation as a choice between the Prime Minister's deal and defaulting to a no-deal situation where we're back to square one is a false choice. So who is correct, the man who wrote Article 50 or the Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
I think, can I say to him, the Article 50 is the basis on which the negotiations continue. Negotiations have been held. It is the triggering of Article 50 that led to the negotiations and led to us, the timetable for leaving on the 29th of March next year. Article 50 in itself does not determine the nature of any future relationship with the European Union. So it is not a question of what Article 50 says. It's a question of negotiating a deal. We've negotiated a deal, and it's a good deal for the UK.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend talks about the national interest, and we all have the national interest at heart, even if we don't necessarily agree with her deal, which personally I think is a halfway house, leaving us neither in nor out of the EU with no confirmed end date. If we can't get the free trade deal that we should be able to get, surely the best way to unite the country is to leave the EU, negotiate a deal from outside, and get our country back.
I say,
Minister,
honourable friend, that I believe that the deal that we've negotiated does enable us to do the things that I'm sure my honourable friend would wish us to do, crucially to bring an end to the jurisdiction of the ECJ in the UK, crucially to bring an end to free movement once and for all, to come out of those aspects of the European Union that have not provided for certain sectors of our economy, the Common Agricultural Policy and the Common Fisheries Policy. We are negotiating a deal with a free trade area at its heart. It goes beyond any other free trade agreement that the European Union has negotiated with other countries. It is an agreement of unprecedented ambition and depth, which is being proposed for the United Kingdom.
Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Even if the Prime Minister gets her blind Brexit deal through Parliament, and it's a big if, we all know it will be only the beginning of detailed negotiations on our relationship with the rest of the EU. Given her deeply offensive comments about EU nationals and the cack-handed way she has negotiated this deal, is she not just a little worried that she might be at the back of the queue when it comes to negotiating her priorities?
No, the commitment on negotiating the future economic partnership and future security partnership from both sides is clear in these documents.
James Cartledge.
Speaker. And when we talk about issues like Gibraltar and the future of fisheries, etc., should we not remember that it is a very direct consequence of deciding to leave the European Union that we are renegotiating all aspects of our arrangements with the EU, and that within those negotiations, inevitably, other member states will try and advance their national interest. In those circumstances, surely the best way forward is to hold our nerve instead of taking as gospel the warnings of President Macron or the claims of a socialist Spanish Prime Minister who has regional elections just around the corner.
Well, can I say to you, honourable friend, he brings a degree of realism in the fact that, of course, as we go into these negotiations, others will have interests which they will wish to put forward and press in those negotiations. The whole point of the negotiation is that it is that process by which you come to a result. We have resisted many of the pressures that have been put forward by Member States and the European Commission in these negotiations so far, and will continue to resist on key issues that my honourable friend has referred to in relation to fish and the Gibraltar in the future.
Nick Dakin.
Many constituents have contacted me about this issue over the last week, Mr. Speaker. Why does the Prime Minister think that the overwhelming majority, whether they voted leave or remain, are urging me to vote against her deal?
Prime Minister.
I will continue to set out why I believe that this is a good deal for the United Kingdom. I've set that out in answer to a number of questions here in this chamber this afternoon, and I will continue to do so.
David Duquette.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In response to my right honourable friend's statement, the right honourable gentleman, the member for Roscoe and Lochaber earlier, claims that, predictably, I must say, that Scottish fishermen have been sold out somehow. Not in the document. According to the Chief Executive of the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, this deal does enable the UK to become an independent coastal state with full unfettered sovereignty over our waters and our natural resources. Who should I tell my constituents who to believe?
Well, I suspect the Scottish Fishermen's Association know rather better the interests and how the interests of Scottish fishermen are going to be provided for than the SNP does.
Mr. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this withdrawal agreement document and the protocols in Ireland, Northern Ireland, Article 5 in the Common Travel Area confirms that associated rights and privileges can continue, in particular with respect to free movement for union citizens and their family members, irrespective of their nationality, to, from and within Ireland. Surely this either means free movement continues via Northern Ireland, or it's a border in the Irish Sea and people travelling from Northern Ireland are subjected to extra checks.
No, the common travel area is an arrangement with Ireland which has been in place since the 1920s. It is absolutely right that we maintain that common travel area. That has been provided for in the withdrawal agreement. It was the right thing to do.
James Morris.
Mr. Speaker, can I commend the Prime Minister for her determination to reach agreement between the UK and the EU with this agreement? And in particular, could I welcome the statement in the political declaration in relation to foreign security and defence policy, where it says that the United Kingdom and the EU would be a champion for a rule-based international order? And would she agree with me that one of the biggest opportunities for the UK as we leave the European Union is precisely to become that champion for a rule-based international order, leveraging our hard and soft power around the world?
My honourable friend makes a very important point. We will indeed be that champion for the rules-based international order, and I would expect to I have been making that point in a number of fora, and I would expect to continue to do so when I attend the G20 later this week.
Hugh Gaffney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Listening to the Prime Minister today and looking at the faces behind the people behind her, there was many more. It is obvious why she wants to hit the road and get out of this place. So if you haven't booked a ticket yet, Prime Minister, I'm happy to provide a one-way ticket. But can the Prime Minister confirm where and when she will meet the leaders of Britain's trade unions, the representatives of the working people across the United Kingdom, who might be helped to able to give you some tips in negotiation?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, we have been having discussions throughout this process with the leaders of the trade unions, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, met Francis O'Grady very recently.
Mark Pawsey.
Mr. Speaker, like the member for Elmont and Rothwell, I've been knocking on doors in my constituency, and one of the reasons why voters in Rugby and in Bulkington told me that one of the key reasons they voted to leave was in order to give the UK ability to control immigration, while businesses, especially those in manufacturing, have said that to keep jobs once we've left, it is vital to retain our just-in-time supply chains. Will the Prime Minister confirm that her agreement delivers on both of these important issues?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I'm happy to give my honourable friend that confirmation. Businesses are very clear about the importance of maintaining those just-in-time supply chains, and similarly, of course, many constituents are concerned to ensure that we are able to make decisions about who should be coming here to the United Kingdom, who should be migrating here to the United Kingdom for ourselves without having that free movement, and this deal delivers on both of those.
Drew Hendry.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister repeats again and again that this is a good deal, but not only has she failed to convince this House, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research say that under her plan, tax revenue would fall by 1.5 to 2% annually. That's £18 to £23 billion less for public services. So how does she account for the gap between her side of a bus plus spending promises on the NHS and this reality?
Prime Minister.
The spending promises on the NHS were clearly dealt with in the budget last November.
Mr. Marcus Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you consider this important issue, there are always going to be risks and there are always going to be trade-offs. But when I have assessed the options in front of me, I consider that the Prime Minister's deal, the one that she's gone and fought hard for with the European Union, it does honour the referendum. It makes sure that we get control of our borders. It makes sure that we get control of our money and our laws. It may not be an easy way to get there, but there was never going to be an easy way to get there. Can my right honourable friend, though, assure me, because I've been listening to this statement since the start and have heard many members on the opposite benches and one or two on this side say that we should rerun the people's vote of 2016. Can you reassure me that we are not going to countenance that, because in all of this, that is a real risk to democracy.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, may I first of all apologise to the House, because I think I just made a reference, which I did earlier as well, to the budget being in November, when in fact it was in October. Can I say to my honourable friend that he's absolutely right. I think everybody needs to look at what is going to deliver on the vote of the British people, and saying to the British people, in a sense, which is what some people who talk about a second referendum are doing, you've got the answer wrong, you've got to think again, is not what we should be doing. We stood 80% of the votes cast at the last general election were for parties that stood on manifesto commitments to deliver on the vote of the British people and deliver Brexit, and we should do just that.
Mike Hill.
Given everything that's been said today, like her predecessor, is the lady still not returning?
Prime Minister.
I believe this is a good deal, and I continue to believe it's a good deal.
Ross Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In 2014, I campaigned head, heart, body and soul to keep this United Kingdom together. The Northern Irish backstop would leave Northern Ireland in a separate regulatory regime. Brussels would have more say over trade and rules on goods in Northern Ireland than the UK Parliament. Northern Ireland would be left under the jurisdiction of a foreign court, and that undermines the UK internal market. As a Scottish unionist, I can't stand by and watch a nation within our United Kingdom be left behind. Does my right honourable friend not share my concern that this backstop could fuel the arguments of nationalists in this country, and therefore it could threaten the break-up of our precious United Kingdom?
Prime Minister.
Like my honourable friend, I'm a passionate unionist as well, and I believe in protecting the integrity of our United Kingdom. And he's raised issues. I have spoken before in this chamber about this question of the regulatory differences that exist between Northern Ireland. Some exist already between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. But in a temporary backstop period, the commitments that could be given by the government actually to ensure that there wasn't regulatory divergence and that we did see that regulatory similarity between the two, with Great Britain and Northern Ireland. In fact, there are many who consider that the Northern Ireland backstop is an advantage to businesses in Northern Ireland. That's one of the reasons why the European Union wouldn't want us to be kept in the backstop. But I can assure my honourable friend that I'm passionately in favour of the Union, and we do everything I can to protect it.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm told that repetition is not a vice. So can I ask the Prime Minister, in the last 2 weeks, what discussions have taken place in regard to future arrangements around the European health insurance card? And on behalf of the 27 million UK citizens who have such a card, can she tell us what she expects that status to be of that card in January 2021?
Prime Minister.
The honourable gentleman might care to look at the healthcare bill, which has had its second reading, which is before this Parliament, which deals with these issues of healthcare.
Mr. Henry Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I declare an interest as a chair of the all-party group for animal welfare. Under the agreement reached between the British Government and the European Union yesterday in Brussels, would it be possible for this country to unilaterally end live animal exports for slaughter?
The answer to my honourable friend is that obviously there are aspects of the future relationship where the detailed determination will be coming in, because I think the heart of the question that he's asked me is about the extent to which we would wish to continue with the common rule book on these sorts of matters. But I would also remind my honourable friend that I and the government have been clear that we want to maintain high animal welfare standards in this country and indeed enhance those standards.
Mr. Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I refer my right honourable friend to paragraph 54 of the political declaration, which refers to social security arrangements, and ask what assessment the government has made of the numbers involved and an estimate of the cost to the British taxpayer?
Prime Minister.
Say to my honourable friend that I think this reference is exactly what I was thinking of when I responded to an earlier question in relation, for example, to pension payments that might take place once we have left the European Union. And as he will see from this is a matter that is yet to be fully addressed within the future negotiations, and obviously we will be looking exactly the issues that he's raised in doing so.
Mr. Simon Clarke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I pay tribute to the Prime Minister's resilience in standing at the dispatch box for so long this afternoon. It's been an absolute tour de force. The bitter truth is that more than half of Conservative backbench MPs have indicated that we will not be able to support the withdrawal agreement, and there is no shame in proposing her deal to the House next month, but there would be in failing to ensure that in parallel comprehensive preparations for an exit on World Trade Organisation terms are being made. Every day matters, and I have to say I don't believe the intensity has yet been seen that there should be to get us ready for that scenario. Will she please accelerate those preparations so that we can be ready for any eventuality?
Prime Minister.
I hope gives some reassurance to my honourable friend that, as I in fact said, I believe in the House last week, that it is clear that obviously we have to, we're looking ahead to a vote here in this House in relation to these matters, and so we continue with our no-deal preparations.
Prime Minister, colleagues, thank you. Point of order, Mr. Pete Wishart.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I'd like your advice about the use of official parliamentary recordings of proceedings of this House. On Thursday, the honourable member for Berwickshire, Roxburgh and Selkirk posted a video clip of an exchange at business questions involving me and the Leader of the House. This clip was heavily edited to give a false and erroneous impression about the nature of the exchange and to draw a false conclusion about what was made when I made no such contribution in this House. The terms and conditions of the use of recorded parliamentary material clearly says that you cannot alter the video and audio of the recording in any way, and members have to actually agree to this as part of the terms of its use. This exchange was clearly altered. It was also altered to give a false impression of what transpired, and already over 40,000 people have seen this heavily edited clip. I have contacted the honourable member and have given the opportunity to take this down voluntarily, an offer in which he has refused. How, therefore, Mr. Speaker, can he be obliged and compelled to take this clip down?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his courtesy in giving me notice of this point of order. It is important that colleagues take care not to give a misleading impression of proceedings by selective editing or unrepresentative quotation either of video content or of Hansard. I do not, however, think that the Chair can act or be expected to act as an immediate arbiter of cases brought to its attention. I refer to the Chair as a collective, to determine whether a misleading impression has or has not been created, deliberately or otherwise. I have always stressed that it is for members to take responsibility for their actions and for what is done on their behalf. A great many honourable and right honourable members make use of the video clipping tool to download extracts from our debates, and this helps bring our proceedings to life. I would encourage them to exercise care when they do so, although I accept, I don't know whether the honourable gentleman does, and I'm not debating the point with him here and now, I accept that some editing must be allowed if these extracts are to be of a manageable length for social media purposes. It is really not satisfactory, I'm not criticising the honourable gentleman, I understand his frustration, for these matters repeatedly to be brought to the attention of the Chair when the Chair has no power to act. Members must, if I may very politely say so, treat others as they would wish themselves to be treated. We'll leave it there for now. If there are no further points of order, we now come to the general debate on the 100-year anniversary of the Royal Air Force. To move the motion, I call the Secretary of State for Defence, Secretary Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted that we have this opportunity to hold this debate on the centenary of the Royal Air Force. Now, Mr. Speaker, as a former Chief Whip, I would always say all the legislation that is brought forward to this House by the government is always excellent legislation. But there is probably fair to say that some legislation is better than others, and I think we could all say that the decision by this House to create the Royal Air Force was one of its finest moments. And actually, if we look at almost 99 years to the day, Lord Trenchard issued his memorandum on the permanent organisation of a Royal Air Force within the £15 million provision approved by the Cabinet. I must confess, I rather wish that £15 million would go as far today in terms of our armed forces as it did 99 years ago. And in his memorandum, he said it was to concentrate on laying the foundation of a highly trained and efficient force. And to make an Air Force worthy of the name, we must create and foster an Air Force spirit by every means in our power. That Air Force spirit is what has been at the core throughout our first 100 years. It remains at the core of a Royal Air Force at the start of its second century. Under the Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, under the banner of RAF 100, the Royal Air Force has delivered a superb campaign to celebrate this important anniversary. More than 165,000 people have visited 6 aircraft tour venues across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, where they've had the chance to see numerous aircraft, including Spitfires, Harriers and Typhoons, and also to meet the incredible people who flew them and who do fly them. I very much hope that colleagues will join me in congratulating all of those who've gone over and above to make this year such a success. And I'd particularly like to take the opportunity to thank Sir Stephen Hillier, the Chief of the Air Staff, who has done so much to make this such a memorable year for his service. Approximately £3 million has been raised as part of the 100th anniversary, and that will now be invested in veterans, young people, as well as those who continue to serve in our Royal Air Force. And this is an appropriate moment to thank our RAF charities, those like the RAF Association, RAF Benevolent Fund and the RAF Charitable Trust and RAF Museum, who work tirelessly to support RAF service personnel, past and present. Of course.
Mr. Speaker, can I remind the Chamber that my daughter is a serving officer in the Royal Air Force? Further to what the Secretary of State said, the gist of which I fully support, right across Britain we still have a lot of redundant buildings of historical importance, particularly with the Second World War and indeed the First World War. Would the Secretary of State be willing to go as far as to say that perhaps we could even expand what he said in terms of tourist attractions and indeed ways of raising money from pleased tourists to help exactly the charities he talks about?
I certainly would be very happy to look at that, and I think we should be very proud of the heritage of the RAF, not just in terms of its planes, but also in terms of the many buildings that were such a vital part of the infrastructure through the Royal Air Force's development. We have a great opportunity to celebrate more and more of what the RAF has done over the last 100 years. And it's incredible to think that in the summer of 1917, as German Zeppelins silently bombarded London, our Royal Air Force didn't even exist. Yet a few months later saw the passing of the Air Force's Constitution Act, and since their formation in April 1918, they haven't looked back. It was this House that created the Royal Air Force, and it's fitting that it is this House that marks the Royal Air Force's success. Of course.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. Would he, however, appreciate that the formation of the Royal Air Force wasn't the start of our airborne capability, and that the RAF, of course, had its provenance in the Royal Naval Air Service and the Royal Flying Corps, and they were operational throughout the Great War to great effect?
The honourable gentleman is absolutely right to point out that The Royal Air Force was born out of many other organisations that contributed so many of the men, the ingenuity and the ethos to this new organisation. And it is those different strands that have actually built the RAF into such a successful organisation that we see today. Can I just make a little bit... always give way to me.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way about the point he makes. It gives me an opportunity to pay tribute to my uncle, Harold Paisley, who in 1939, at age 16, joined the RAF. Whenever they found out that he had misrepresented his age, he was subsequently put out and ended up in the Merchant Navy instead. But that being said, each year, Airwaves show that takes place in East Londonderry in Portrush is one of the biggest air shows in the United Kingdom. It's also the single largest recruitment air show for the RAF. Can he ensure that it continues to get support and endorsement each year from the RAF so as we can continue to recruit Ulster men and women into the RAF?
Well, Northern Ireland has always played an important role in all of our three services, contributing far more men and women to our armed forces as a proportion of its population than I think any other part of the United Kingdom, both in regulars and reserves. And in terms of support for future air shows, the Royal Air Force is absolutely committed to the support of air shows. We have a clear understanding of the value in terms of telling the story of what the Royal Air Force does. And if we take an opportunity to look back a century ago, we see the Royal Air Force that was then mapping the trenches and directing Allied artillery in order to be able to deliver victory in the Great War. In our darkest hour, in the Second World War, they were our last line of defence against the Luftwaffe, and the Battle of Bresson cemented the RAF's reputation, the reputation of a few, the dashing, daring, dogged determination of the Royal Air Force to protect and preserve our values and our nation. Our debt to the Royal Air Force continued throughout the chill of the Cold War. Theirs were the Vulcan bombers that carried our ultimate deterrent, and theirs was the transport aircraft that delivered essential aid to the people of West Berlin 70 years ago in that famous airlift, the first major humanitarian exercise in modern history. In 1982, it was the Royal Air Force who displayed incredible ingenuity to project strategic air power over thousands of miles to help and support the liberation of the Falkland Islands. It was the RAF's flagship event that we all witnessed this year that brought this powerfully home to us all. Like many of us, not just in this House, but right around the country, I think we watched in awe as we saw that fly past. The unmistakable sound of Spitfires, Hurricanes and Lancasters, the thunderous roar of the F-35 Tornadoes and Typhoons, as they celebrated not just 100 years of an organisation existing, but 100 years of fighting spirit, of a nation coming together. And as you saw those crowds on the Mall, these were men and women who had come to say their thank you to their Royal Air Force, because we as a nation truly do owe them